Drogon was last seen flying east across the sunset sea with Daenerys Targaryen's body clutched in his claws, the mother of dragons felled by a betrayal none had ever truly foreseen. He had roared his grief over the ruins of the Iron Throne before vanishing into the sky, leaving the realm to sort out its broken loyalties and shape a new order. For moons uncounted, whispers spread of a monstrous black dragon carving through the skies above the Dothraki Sea, the Red Waste, and beyond. Some said Drogon sought the birthplace of his kind, Valyria, the haunted empire that once birthed the Targaryens and a dozen other Dragonlord families before the doom consumed it in molten fire. Others believed he merely wandered, riderless and lost, until death claimed him in some distant land. But no one in Westeros expected him to return, and certainly not with a new rider astride his back. On a cold dawn in King's Landing, many years after the realm had crowned King Bran the Broken, the city awoke to commotion at the harbor. Fishermen who cast their nets in the Blackwater Bay swore they glimpsed a shape in the morning light that was neither ship nor cloud. At first they hoped it was no more than a storm, some strange distortion of sunrise that tricked weary eyes. But as the minutes passed, the monstrous silhouette grew, wings beating with a slow, terrifying grace. People on the quayside froze in place, fishermen abandoned half-pulled nets, dockworkers forgot the weight in their arms, and even the cries of gulls fell silent. The creature that soared toward the city walls was large enough to blot out the rising sun for half a breath. Then came the roar, a deep, echoing sound that rattled the stones of the city's foundations. Drogon, unmistakably larger than any living soul had ever seen a dragon become, circled above the Red Keep. His black scales glinted with a faint sheen of red in the early light, his massive wings beating the air into swirling gusts that sent banners rippling and flung dust across the streets. Once, Daenerys had perched atop him, silver hair shining. Now another figure sat astride the dragon's back, armored in a strange metal that shimmered with iridescent shades, like polished obsidian yet flecked with silver and gold. Long hair the color of pale fire streamed from beneath a helm crested with dragon's wings. The figure guided Drogon with a firm but gentle hand, an ease that suggested more than mere taming, a bond so seamless it might have been forged in the cradle of a destroyed empire. King Bran was in his private solar, tucked into a maze of corridors within the Red Keep, when the call came. A dragon. Drogon has returned. The guards sounded alarm horns, and the small council scrambled. Men rushed to barricade gates, archers frantically manned the battlements. Yet within the hallways, those who remembered Daenerys Targaryen's siege quailed at the thought of another dragon unleashed. But the years under Bran's rule had been ones of relative peace. The monarchy was more concerned with healing scars than waging war. Not an arrow flew as Drogon roosted upon a demolished corner of the battlements that had once been destroyed by dragonfire. Rubble cracked beneath his mighty weight, and even the green scum on the stones seemed to hiss into steam as if anticipating the searing heat of his breath. The figure upon Drogon's back dismounted with a calm confidence, removing the helm to reveal a face both youthful and ancient. High cheekbones, eyes of pale violet, and hair nearly as white as snow, an echo of Valyrian features that none had seen in Westeros since Daenerys herself. The armor this individual wore was a marvel, etched with runes that seemed to undulate under the morning light, as though the metal remembered the old magic from which it had been formed. When the gates to the keep parted, and a retinue led by Sir Podrick Payne approached, swords in hand but trembling with uncertainty, the newcomer raised both hands in a gesture of peace. "I come to speak with your king," the rider announced, voice resonating with an accent that none of them recognized, harsh yet melodic, as if shaped by a tongue far older than the common speech. No threat was offered, no flame was spewed. There was merely that monstrous black dragon with deep scars on its flanks, and the slender rider who stroked Drogon's neck as if calming him. Sir Podrick exchanged nervous glances with the other guards. They knew that if Drogon chose violence, their swords and spears would amount to nothing. "Lower your weapons," he finally commanded, recalling King Bran's many lessons of diplomacy and the role of memory. "His Grace will decide how to welcome this visitor." So with hearts pounding, they led the newcomer inside. The halls of the Red Keep still bore signs of the Great War and the conflicts that followed. Since the realm's rough unification under King Bran, reconstruction had replaced scorched beams and broken ramparts with new stone, But in many corners, the shadows of old battles lingered, unseen ghosts. The newcomer took it all in with a steady gaze, pausing at times to brush fingertips against the carved walls, as though tasting history. With each step, the rider exuded a quiet confidence that thrummed with the promise of strange magic. At last they reached the throne room. Bran the Broken sat upon a newly fashioned seat of power, for the Iron Throne had been melted into a twisted ruin in Daenerys Targaryen's final moments. What replaced it was a simpler throne of wood and silver, shaped with a craftsman's care, symbolizing a gentler reign. Flanking Bran were his loyal members of council, Tyrion Lannister, older now, hair gone white around the temples, but mind as sharp as ever, Sir Brienne of Tarth, the Lord Commander of the King's Guard, her bearing as unshakable as a granite cliff, and Davos Seaworth, who observed the newcomer with the same cautious curiosity he once reserved for Melisandre's prophecies. Bran's eyes fixed on the rider, and for a long moment no one spoke. The hush was broken only by the distant caw of crows that perched upon the windowsills, as if drawn by the significance of the arrival. The rider bowed at the waist. "I am Vera of the blood of Valyria. I come to you as a messenger and something more if you will have it." The voice was neither harsh nor docile. It carried an undercurrent of commanding presence, a subtle confidence rooted in ancient lineage. "Your people name the dragon Drogon. He was once bound to the last Targaryen queen. Now he has chosen anew." Tyrion was the first to speak. "Chosen anew? Do you mean he is bound to you then? How does one choose a dragon?" Vera's lips curved into the faintest of smiles. "Dragons do not bend to mortal desires unless they so wish it. Drogon found me in Valyria, or what remains of it. Call it a bond of necessity at first. We share a common blood. The dragon lords of old. He recognized something in me and I in him." Davos shifted his weight. "And what, pray, brought you to King's Landing?" Bran, watchful, did not interrupt. He observed Vera with an intensity that belied his often placid demeanor. Within him lived the memories of 1,000 years and more. He had witnessed the destruction wrought by dragons, but also recognized their significance in the grand tapestry of Westeros. Valyria inhaled slowly, as though measuring her words. "A realm stands on the precipice of change. Drogon and I bring warning and opportunity." She glanced at Bran, the corner of her eyes flickering with curiosity. "You are the three-eyed Raven King. You see many things. Perhaps you have seen what stirs across the sea, in the shadows of old powers." Bran inclined his head. "Perhaps," he said softly. He did not yet reveal what he had seen, visions of shifting shapes in the ruins of Valyria, flickers of sorceries thought long dead. Tyrion cleared his throat. "We have had peace for many years. If you bring word of trouble, state it plainly." Varys' gaze swept the throne room. "I bring word of an awakening in Valyria. The doom left behind more than shattered towers and rivers of molten stone. Deep in the catacombs, things stir that have not walked the world since the height of the Freehold's might. My arrival here is not to threaten. It is to unite. The Targaryens hailed from Valyria. Their dragons shaped this land. You have a choice. Let Valyria's secrets devour themselves in the darkness, or face what comes with open eyes." Sir Brienne's jaw tightened. "And what exactly is coming?" An echoing silence followed. Then Vera's eyes seemed to darken, as if recalling horrors best left in the shadows. Creatures that never died. Sorceries older than men's memories, and those who would claim them for ambition's sake. Bran shifted upon his throne. A sudden breeze stirred his cloak, and the crows outside cawed again. "And you would ask our help?" "I ask for alliance," Valyria said simply. "Westeros was once bound by the might of dragons. Now you have but one, and he stands at my side. The threats that lurk in Valyria reach beyond seas. If they rise, they will not stay contained. What was done to the Summer Isles or the Stepstones in ages past would be but a taste." Tyrion studied Valyria in silence, his mind churning with what this alliance might mean. The realm, still healing from its numerous wars, would not easily rally behind a new dragon rider. There would be suspicion, fear, jealousy. But in his wisdom, Tyrion knew ignoring potential threats was a far graver risk. Bran nodded slowly. "We shall talk further. For now, you are welcome as our guest. You and Drogon both. But know this, I remember everything that came before, and I will see everything that comes after. If your intentions prove false. He did not finish the sentence, nor did he need to. His power was not of the sword or fire, but of knowledge and the unseen. Valyria inclined her head again. I understand. That day, no one in the Red Keep could tear their thoughts from the dragon perched upon the ramparts, black wings folded, tail swaying like the lash of a vigilant predator. King's Landing's populace either cowered in their homes or crept close to vantage points for a glimpse of the living wonder. Children perched on rooftops, eyes wide. Old soldiers remembered the terror of the last time a dragon circled those skies. Whispers began spreading of a new Targaryen, another mad queen or king, or perhaps a savior. Only the next days would tell. Valyria was given chambers in Maegor's holdfast, ones that looked out over the city. While attendants brought fresh garments, food, and water, she moved around the room with her characteristic calm, occasionally murmuring in a language that was not the common tongue, nor High Valyrian, but some archaic dialect seldom heard even in the days before the doom. Shadows seemed to cling to her movements, as if old magic still coiled around her aura. Yet she greeted every servant with a measured courtesy. Meanwhile, the small council convened. Lady Brienne, Davos, Tyrion, and a handful of new lords who had risen to prominence during Bran's reign sat around the council table. Bran himself remained at the head, expression neutral. The question hung in the air: what to do about Valyria, and how to handle Drogon. She claims to be of Valyrian blood, Tyrion began, lacing his fingers together. We have had pretenders before, Blackfires, bastard lines, conjurers. But Drogon wouldn't suffer a fraud. He's too canny, too bonded to Daenerys' bloodline. If he accepts her as a rider, there must be a reason. Nay. Sir Brienne's armor clinked as she leaned forward. She speaks of threats in Valyria, of old sorceries. Could this be some conjuration intended to sow chaos in the realm? Davos sighed. We fought the undead, faced dragons, survived the madness of queens and kings. I'd not be surprised if there were darker things still lurking in old ruins. The question is whether we risk the peace we've built to chase shadows in Valyria. Bran turned his head, his far-seeing gaze drifting as if looking beyond the room. The truth of Valyria cannot be ignored. The fragments I've glimpsed suggest a stirring in that ruined land. The question is whether we face it now, with caution, or wait until it washes upon our shores. Tyrion exhaled. Valyria is a cursed place. Even pirates and sell-sails avoid it. But if Valyria and Drogon have navigated it, that means there are still secrets there. Perhaps an ancient power with the potential to shift the balance of power in the entire world. The debate raged. Some insisted that the realm had no appetite for foreign wars. Others argued that ignoring a threat would be the height of folly. Ultimately, Bran declared that he would learn more from Valyria. If her words held truth, a diplomatic expedition might be arranged. If they did not, then the realm would remain vigilant and better prepared. In her chamber, Valyria stood by the window, gazing at Drogon. The sun glistened off the dragon's black scales, revealing the faint pattern of old scars from battles fought beyond the horizon. She closed her eyes, recalling the day she and Drogon first crossed paths, how his roar shattered the endless gloom, how her heart pounded with equal parts terror and reverence. She had approached him in the ruins of a Valyrian tower, where molten rock and twisted metal formed unnatural shapes. He had been wounded, roosting in the skeleton of what might have once been a temple. The air had pulsed with the echoes of old magic, and when Valyria drew near, she felt something awaken in her blood, a memory not hers, a call older than her mortal flesh. Drogon had watched her with burning red eyes, not moving, not attacking. Slowly, step by step, she had come within arm's reach, extended her hand, and touched the warm midnight scales. Then Drogon had lowered his head, allowing her to press her forehead against his. It was as if two souls had found each other in a world that had forgotten them. She remembered how she coaxed him to feed, to accept her presence, and how he offered her flight across the broken spires of Valyria's capital. She remembered the half-buried murals, the mosaic floors that told stories of 1,000 dragons and their riders, forging an empire with fire and blood. She remembered glimpses of men and women twisted by arcane knowledge, enslaving entire populations in the name of expansion. She also recalled the uneasy sense that some piece of that empire was not entirely dead, that something slumbered within the labyrinth of collapsed tunnels. Her thoughts were interrupted by a knock at the chamber door. A young servant girl, no older than 12, stepped inside. "My lady, the king requests your presence at supper. Will you be attending?" Valyria nodded, offering a small smile. "I will." She allowed the girl to lead her through corridors lit by torches that danced with the draft. Painted panels depicting Targaryen conquest and Baratheon defiance lined the walls, a testament to the cyclical nature of rule in Westeros. History was etched in every corner here, and she wondered if the realm was prepared to face the echoes of an even older empire. The great hall glittered with candles. The table was not so grand as the feasts of old, for Bran kept a modest court, but enough lords and ladies attended to fill the space with soft murmurs. Soldiers in polished armor stood guard. Tyrion was there, sipping wine and leaning in to whisper something to Davos. Brienne spoke quietly with another knight about matters of security. At the head of the table, Bran sat in a carved wooden chair, an elaborate design of carved weirwood leaves at the crest. The seat, though less imposing than the Iron Throne, still commanded respect. Valyria arrived, dressed in a simple gown of black and silver, the fabric reflecting the flickering light like the scales of her dragon. She inclined her head in greeting. King Bran gestured to a seat at his right, an honor not lost on the gathered courtiers. As she sat, she could sense the wariness and curiosity radiating from every corner. "Welcome to our table," Bran said, his voice calm. "I trust you are finding comfort in the Red Keep?" "I am, your grace," Valyria replied. "And I thank you for your hospitality." Food was served: roasted meats, fresh bread, vegetables from the Crown Lands, and Dornish wine. Valyria ate sparingly, mindful of every glance from suspicious lords. Tyrion watched her intently, as if trying to pierce her mask of composure. Davos too occasionally flicked his gaze in her direction. It was Bran who finally broke the tension. "You spoke of threats stirring in Valyria," he said quietly. "I would like to hear more." Valyria placed her fork gently on her plate. The doom shattered Valyria, but it did not consume all its secrets. The Empire's knowledge of blood magic, dragon lore, and necromancy lingered in hidden vaults. Over the centuries, a few daring souls sought those ruins for treasure or power. Most never returned. But some, I believe, have persisted. Cults and covens that practiced twisted forms of arcane arts, feeding on residual power in the land. Then, Bran's expression remained impassive, but the hall had grown silent. Every ear strained to catch Valyria's words. "In my travels through the ruins with Drogon," she continued, "bones carved with runes older than High Valyrian, whispering voices in the dark, I found a living city, hidden behind illusions and illusions behind illusions. Some twisted reflection of the old freehold, with monstrous beasts that were shaped by unnatural experiments. I saw watchers in the gloom. They wore masks hammered from Valyrian steel, and chanted to gods that demanded offerings of blood. A murmur rippled through the assembled. Blood magic was the domain of nightmares, half-forgotten legends associated with the darkest corners of sorcery. "What do these cultists want?" asked Tyrion, swirling his wine but not drinking. "Power, dominion, the revival of an empire that once spanned continents. They believe they can harness the essence of dragons to fuel spells that would elevate them to something more than mortal." Valyria's gaze swept across the table. "They venerate dragons, but they also wish to enslave them, as the old dragonlords once did. I fear that if they discover Drogon, if they realize one of the last living dragons of Targaryen blood has returned to Valyria, they will stop at nothing to capture or destroy him." Sarah Brienne leaned in. "But why come here? Why not remain hidden, defending yourselves in those ruins?" "Because facing such a threat alone is foolhardy. Even Drogon, mighty as he is, cannot hold off an entire faction of dark sorcerers if they truly unite." And Valyria paused, "because I believe that Westeros must learn the lesson Daenerys Targaryen once tried to teach, however flawed her methods became. Dragons are not merely weapons. They are part of the world's balance. To lose them, to allow them to be corrupted, is to invite another doom, perhaps even greater. I suspect your king, with his unique connection to the Weirwoods, sees echoes of this as well." "No." Bran said nothing, but his intense stare suggested that he saw more than any of them suspected. After a long silence, he dipped his head in agreement. We cannot remain blind. So, what would you have of us? Valyria took a measured breath. An expedition to Valyria. A small force, carefully chosen. We go not to wage open war, but to see with our own eyes the nature of this threat, and to undermine it if we can, prevent it from crossing the sea. Nadi. At that, many of the lords shifted uncomfortably. One of them, Lord Grafton of Gulltown, shook his head. Sail into that cursed land? For what? The realm has bled enough. Tyrion raised a brow. The realm bled when we ignored the signs of the Night King until it was nearly too late. It is not my decision alone, Bran said gently. He looked around the hall, letting his gaze settle on each of them. I am not my predecessors. I will not drag the 7 kingdoms into war without counsel. Think on this. Valyria will remain our guest while we discuss the matter. That concluded the dinner's official business, though the tension remained thick. Valyria excused herself soon after, stepping out into the courtyard to find a moment's peace. She smelled the sea air drifting up from Blackwater Bay and caught a glimpse of Drogon perched high above, his serpentine neck silhouetted against the sky. For a moment, she closed her eyes and let her mind wander, half hoping to communicate with the dragon the way old Valyrian lore said one could. She felt the faintest tremor in her blood, the sense that Drogon was near, attuned to her presence. She remembered the first time she'd flown with him over the smoking sea, the horizon marred by pillars of steam that rose from underwater vents. The metallic tang of the air, the oppressive heat that made sweat trickle down her spine even in flight. She recalled seeing the skeletal remains of massive dragons, their bones fused with molten rock, and feeling a pang of sorrow for a legacy so grand turned to ruin. And she remembered the eyes of men who lurked in those ruins, eyes that glowed with a feverish hunger for a power that had rightfully died centuries before. Valyria is a graveyard, she whispered to the night air. Yet the dead do not always rest. Over the following days, debates raged among Bran's closest advisors. They weighed the cost of an expedition, the potential dangers, the political ramifications. Rumors surged through King's Landing. Some claimed Valyria was a sorceress who had bewitched the dragon. Others whispered that she was Daenerys reborn. The city's scribes churned out ravens, carrying missives to lords across the realm, soliciting opinions and alliances. The North responded warily. The Vale's new leadership was uncertain. Dorne was the most curious, for it had once known the wrath of Targaryen conquest, and had learned to resist dragons. But times had changed, and peace under Bran had softened old grudges. Each evening, Valyria was summoned to speak further with the king. He questioned her about Valyrian customs, old magic, and her own past. She revealed little of her personal story, only that she was born to a family of nomadic survivors who traced their lineage to an exiled Valyrian house that once fled the doom. She had grown up listening to tales of dragonlords, their cruelty and their splendor. She had wandered the ruins in search of answers to her heritage, never expecting to find a living dragon, or to forge a bond that would reshape her destiny. Bran listened with unwavering attention, his pale eyes seeming to sift her every word, seeking truth amid half-truths. Yet something in Varys' bearing and Drogon's acceptance of her spoke volumes. Perhaps the realm needed a new kind of alliance, one that combined the memory of the old gods and the power of Valyria. Finally, a decision was reached. They would send a small expedition, led by none other than Tyrion Lannister, Davos Seaworth, and a hand-picked company of knights and scholars. Bran would remain in King's Landing, for his place was here, though many suspected his abilities would extend across the seas if he chose to warg through birds or glean visions from the weirwoods. Sir Brienne, as Lord Commander, would stay behind to protect the capital, and Valyria, of course, would guide them, with Drogon as their steed and guard in the skies. Word was sent to noble houses, a call for volunteers, not a royal decree. In the end, only a few dared commit. Gendry Baratheon, Lord of Storm's End, offered to join. He had always been restless, forging alliances as a blacksmith might shape steel. Lady Asha Greyjoy, once the terror of the seas, now a seasoned leader of the Iron Islands, expressed an interest in seeing the smoking sea with her own eyes. She promised a swift longship that could navigate treacherous waters. And so, bit by bit, a band of unlikely companions formed. The day they set sail dawned gray and cold. A sea mist clung to the hull of Asha's longship, christened the Kraken's Fang. Tyrion stood at the prow, swathed in a heavy cloak, Davos by his side checking the rigging. Gendry, tall and broad-shouldered, helped load supplies. Valyria arrived with Drogon flying overhead, shadow passing over the deck and making the sailors shudder. She touched down on the quay before boarding, her expression somber but determined. "My father would have laughed to see me journeying willingly into a cursed land," Asha said to Tyrion, a wry grin on her face. "But it beats rotting at home with squabbling Ironborn." Tyrion only half smiled. Better cursed land than cursed politics, perhaps. They left King's Landing behind, the Red Keep's towers fading in the distance. Days passed on the sea, and tension among the crew remained high. Tyrion found himself gazing at Valyria whenever she stood at the rails, wind tousling her pale hair. He wondered what truly drove her. Curiosity? Duty? Ambition? He tried to engage her in conversation. Sometimes she obliged, relating small tales of lost Valyrian cities. Other times she merely stared at the horizon, as if listening to voices carried on the wind. Drogon soared overhead for most of the journey, occasionally dipping close to the waves to snatch fish or to circle the ship like a vigilant sentinel. Sailors watched the black beast with mingled awe and dread, careful to keep their distance when he glided low. At night, Valyria whistled softly, and Drogon would land on a small, rocky outcrop near wherever the ship anchored, curling up with an air of regal aloofness. Weeks later, they approached the smoking sea. The water turned gray and choppy, dotted with rising plumes of vapor where geothermal fissures released scalding heat. The sky seemed perpetually overcast, and the air carried a sulphurous tang. Jagged silhouettes emerged in the distance, twisted spires and half-collapsed towers that once housed the glory of the freehold. It was said that no map could chart the waters around Valyria accurately, for the land constantly shifted, and the seas boiled with hidden dangers. Asha paced the deck, barking orders to her crew. "Bring her around!" she shouted, pointing at a swirl of steam that rose like a phantom from the depths. "We'll skirt the edge of that vent. I've no wish to boil in my own ship." Gendry, arms folded, stared grimly at the looming ruins. Tyrion joined him. "Quiet sight," the Hand of the King muttered. "Hard to believe men once walked there in pride," Gendry said. "Now it looks like the skeleton of a giant beast, rotted from the inside." Valyria stood nearby, silent. When they drew close enough, she signaled Drogon, and the great dragon descended to hover beside the ship, the gust from his wings lashing them with salt spray. Valyria murmured a parting word to Tyrion and Davos. "There is a narrow channel that leads to an inlet," she explained. "We can anchor there safely. But from this point onward, vigilance is paramount." They followed her directions, threading through rocky outcrops that jutted from the steaming waters. The fortress-like shapes of Valyrian ruins rose all around them, black stone fused with ancient lava flows. Some columns leaned precariously over the water, while others had collapsed entirely, forming submerged hazards that could rip a hull apart. The stench of sulfur was almost overwhelming. At last, they reached a sheltered cove beneath a tall escarpment. Ancient steps carved into volcanic rock led up to what might once have been a grand plaza. Valyria disembarked first, scanning the shoreline for signs of life. Drogon roared, shaking the air as if to warn any lurking threat to keep its distance. The Kraken's Fang dropped anchor. A small contingent of sailors remained on board to guard the ship. Asha, Tyrion, Davos, and Gendry joined Valyria in a landing party. As they climbed the steps, the oppressive weight of history and tragedy pressed down on them. The air felt charged, like the hush before a storm. Tyrion caught sight of mosaics under the grime of centuries, dragons in flight, crowned with proud riders. He thought of Daenerys. Perhaps this was her ancestral homeland in all its fallen glory. "It's quieter than I expected," Asha remarked, her voice echoing off the worn stone. "I thought we'd see beasts crawling from every crevice." "Don't be too eager," Davos murmured. "Sometimes the deadliest foes prefer patience." Valyria led them deeper into the ruins. Here and there a broken statue loomed, chipped features that might have once depicted Valyrian nobles or gods. Archways led to corridors that disappeared into darkness. The group moved carefully, weapons drawn. Drogon alighted on a wide courtyard where the paving stones were cracked and overgrown with weird, ash-gray vines. Valyria placed a hand on the dragon's flank, feeling the tension in his muscles. Night was approaching. They decided to make camp in the courtyard, near an intact column that offered partial shelter. Fires were out of the question, too easily spotted, so they settled for cold rations. The gloom grew until only the faint phosphorescent glow of certain mushrooms and lichen illuminated the edges of the stones. Somewhere, deep in the labyrinth of collapsed structures, water dripped in an irregular rhythm, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. Tyrion tried to get comfortable, but his back ached against the stone. He turned to Valyria, who stood on guard. "Any sign of the cult you mentioned?" "They might be here," she said softly. "Or deeper within. This is just the outskirts. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it becomes." He nodded, wrapping his cloak tighter. "Remind me again why I agreed to this." Valyria allowed a small smirk to cross her lips. "Because you understand the stakes." A distant echo sounded, something between a scrape and a sigh. Gendry tensed, hand on the pommel of his sword. They listened, hearts pounding. Then silence. By morning, the tension had only grown. They ventured forward, crossing a narrow bridge that spanned a chasm clogged with rubble and sulfuric vents. On the far side, the architecture was more intact. They passed a series of petrified trees that curled around broken arches like frozen serpents. Tyrion felt a chill, though the air was still thick with heat and sulfur. He saw designs etched into the walls, swirling patterns reminiscent of dragons' eyes, or perhaps flames. The lines seemed to shift when viewed in his peripheral vision. Drogon prowled behind them like a guardian. Valyria consulted a faint memory of the city's layout, gleaned from scattered scrolls, and her own exploration. "There was a temple dedicated to the 13 Flames," she said. "The old gods of Valyria. That's where I sense the strongest presence. We should find it at the city's core." None. As they advanced, they began to see more evidence of recent activity. Footprints in the ash, discarded torches, half-collapsed tents made of strange, shimmering fabric. A handful of mummified corpses lay in alcoves, bearing the remains of battered armor. Perhaps treasure hunters who ventured too far. Once they stumbled upon a small pit filled with bones. Human or otherwise, it was hard to tell. Gendry muttered a quick prayer to the seven under his breath. Suddenly, Drogon snarled, craning his neck toward a cluster of rubble that formed a partial wall. Valyria stiffened. She signaled the others to stop. Without warning, a figure emerged from behind the stones. It wore a mask shaped like a snarling dragon's maw, fashioned from dark metal that shimmered with unnatural light. A symbol was etched on its forehead, a twisted rune that made Tyrion's skin crawl just to look at it. The figure regarded them silently for a moment. Then, as if from the darkness itself, more masked individuals appeared, 6, then 10, then 15. They surrounded the group, forming a half-circle between them and the path forward. No one spoke. The masked figures carried weapons of obsidian-like glass, each etched with the same eerie rune. Valyria's hand hovered near her sword hilt and the rest followed suit. One cultist stepped forward, lifting the mask's lower half to speak. "You tread on sacred ground," came a voice, guttural and accented in a manner that only half-matched Valyria's own. "Leave your dragon here if you wish to proceed." Tyrion let out a breathy laugh, though there was no humor in it. "That's quite the request," he said quietly. "Don't think Drogon would agree to that." Drogon growled, smoke curling from his nostrils. The cultists did not flinch. Valyria felt a surge of dread. These people had seen dragons before, or were prepared for them somehow. One cultist brandished a staff capped with a crystal that glowed red, an unsettling glow that made the shadows writhe. "Our presence is not meant for violence," Valyria said, stepping forward carefully. "We came to see the fate of this land and to ensure that none exploit its horrors. Do you serve the 13 Flames?" A low hiss spread through the gathered cultists. "We serve that which was never extinguished," the leading figure intoned. "What lingered even after the fires consumed this empire. A power that predates the freehold itself. You come with a living dragon, an offering, or an offense." Valyria felt Drogon's tension. She glanced at Tyrion and the others. They were hopelessly outnumbered, and the cultists clearly had knowledge of sorcery. She raised her voice, adopting the formal tone of High Valyrian. This dragon is kin to the ones that once ruled the skies here. He is no offering to any false god. Stand aside. Nimor hat. The lead cultist let out a hollow laugh, pulling the mask down. The ancient pacts demand tribute. If you will not offer the dragon, offer yourselves. And with that, the group of cultists advanced. Chaos erupted. Drogon let out a blast of flame that scorched the cultists on the right flank, their screams echoing. The survivors darted around, some chanting incantations that caused the air to crackle with a sickly energy. Asha loosed a crossbow bolt, taking down one who aimed the glowing staff at Drogon. Davos and Gendry formed a defensive line, steel clashing with obsidian blades that hissed with black steam on impact. Tyrion scrambled for cover, cursing the day he ever stepped foot off the boat. He saw Valyria draw her longsword, a blade of Valyrian steel that shimmered with runes. She parried a cultist's strike, pivoted gracefully, and drove her sword into his chest. An inhuman wail rang out, and black ichor spattered the broken stones. Drogon's fury was unleashed in another jet of flame, incinerating several cultists who tried to flank them. But the chanting grew louder. One cultist aimed the staff at Drogon, releasing a shockwave of crimson energy that slammed into the dragon's flank, sending him staggering. Drogon roared in pain. The synergy between Valyria and her dragon flared like an invisible tether. She whirled on the source of the spell, eyes blazing with rage. "Drogon!" Valyria shouted, the single word carrying command. The great dragon took to the air, wings beating a hurricane of dust and ash, then dove down to release a torrent of flame that seared the cultist and shattered the staff in a burst of crackling sparks. But the confrontation was costly. Tyrion saw Gendry grappling with two masked foes, smashing one's head with the hilt of his sword and kicking the other away. Davos winced as an obsidian blade nicked his arm, though he managed to retaliate with a swift cut across the attacker's throat. Within minutes, the assault ended as quickly as it began. The remaining cultists fled into the ruins, their chanting echoing from the darkness, leaving their dead and dying behind. Drogon landed heavily, panting smoke. Valyria rushed to his side, pressing her hand against a scorched patch of his scales. Blood trickled from the edges of his mouth, but whether it was his or that of his enemies was not clear. Tyrion and the others took stock of their wounds. Davos' arm bled, Asha had a deep cut along her brow, but both could still walk. Gendry's shield was split, but he seemed unhurt aside from bruises. Panting, Tyrion surveyed the fallen cultists. Their masks lay scattered, revealing faces twisted not by nature, but by some hideous corruption. Their flesh bore branded runes, and their eyes seemed devoid of humanity. He shuddered. So much for a peaceful expedition. Valyria knelt beside a dead cultist, lifting the broken staff. The crystal at its tip sputtered with leftover magical energy. She flinched, dropping it as if it burned her. They're harnessing something from the old empire's darkest arts. How many more are there? Asha spat, wiping blood from her temple. Too many, Valyria replied grimly. We're close to the city's center. If they're truly entrenched, we have only seen a fraction of their strength. We should retreat, Davos suggested, voice raspy. Get back to the ship. Return with reinforcements or... Before he could finish, a rumble shook the ground. Dust rained from shattered arches. It felt like the earth itself was moaning in protest. Drogon snarled, spreading his wings protectively around Valyria and the group. Tyrion felt his heart slam in his chest. Another vent, he managed, glancing at the ground. Valyria's eyes narrowed. No, it's something else. Then, from the far end of the plaza, the rubble shifted. Something massive rose, a shape that seemed pieced together from jagged bones, covered in unnatural black flesh that pulsed with veins of red. It resembled a dragon, but warped beyond sanity, twisted by whatever dark power these cultists served. Where eyes should have been, there was only a glowing red emptiness. Its wings unfurled with a sickening crack, and a roar ripped through the air, rattling the stones. Tyrion stared in horror. What in all seven hells is that? A shade of the old world, Valyria whispered. A draconis enigma, a dragon abomination, if the legends hold true. The monstrosity lashed its tail, pulverizing a section of wall. Ash and debris rained down. Drogon roared back, flames licking his maw. The abomination responded with a torrent of black fire that hissed like acid, scorching the stones where the group stood. Valyria and the others dove aside. Droplets of black flame landed on Tyrion's cloak, and he hastily rolled on the ground to extinguish them. Davos cursed, pulling a stunned Asha to her feet. "We can't fight that." Valyria's face was set in grim resolve. "If we flee, it will pursue us, or else plague whoever attempts to venture here next. Better to destroy it now, if we can." She turned to Drogon. Their eyes locked, forging that invisible bond once again. The abomination advanced, massive claws digging furrows in the stone. Drogon took flight, unleashing a column of flame at the creature's head. The black dragon reeled, roaring in fury but continuing forward. The group scattered to avoid the clash of these titans. Valyria found higher ground on a broken ledge, scanning for any advantage. "Try to ground it," she shouted to no one in particular, though none but Drogon had the means to do so. Tyrion, Davos, Asha, and Gendry scrambled behind chunks of rubble, occasionally loosing crossbow bolts or throwing spears that clanged uselessly against the abomination's hide. Drogon dived again, snapping at the twisted dragon's neck, but the abomination twisted with unnatural agility, hooking Drogon with a black horn. Drogon shrieked in pain, black scales splintering. Blood spattered across the broken stones. Valyria let out a cry. She sprinted, fearless across the courtyard, leaping from one slab of rubble to another. The abomination inhaled, preparing another blast of black flame. "Drogon, up!" Valyria yelled in High Valyrian. Drogon heeded, flapping his wings to gain height, narrowly avoiding the scorching jet of blackness. But the twisted dragon soared after him with a terrifying leap, smashing columns as it kicked off the ground. Time seemed to slow for Tyrion as he watched the two dragons lock in midair, jaws snapping, wings buffeting. Drogon's roar echoed with pain. The abomination's chest glowed with malevolent power. If something wasn't done, Drogon would be overpowered. Without thinking, Valyria ran to a vantage point on a high ledge. She pressed her palm against an ancient symbol carved into the rock, a stylized dragon's eye. The stone cracked and parted, revealing a hidden alcove. Inside lay a spear of dark metal, etched with runes. It pulsed with a faint, eerie light. With trembling determination, Valyria grasped the spear. The metal felt alive in her hands, humming with the residue of Valyria's old magic. She darted out onto a precarious ledge, positioning herself just above the abomination's flank as it grappled with Drogon. Gathering every ounce of courage, she hurled the spear with a shout that reverberated across the plaza. The weapon arced through the air, trailing sparks of arcane energy, and struck the abomination's side. A flash of crimson light blinded everyone momentarily, followed by an ear-splitting screech. The monstrous dragon reeled, thrashing wildly. The spear lodged in its flesh, runes igniting like veins of living fire. With a final howl, the abomination lost altitude, slamming into the ground with a thunderous crash, sending tremors throughout the ruins. Drogon, wounded, landed heavily but managed to stay upright, smoke curling from his nostrils. Valyria rushed to Drogon's side, checking his wounds. The abomination writhed, pinned by the magical spear. The black fire in its mouth guttered, and its contorted limbs scraped at the stone in a futile attempt to rise. Tyrion and the others cautiously approached. It was Asha who, driven by fury or adrenaline, let out a rallying shout and slashed at the creature's head with a Valyrian steel axe she'd taken from a fallen cultist. It shuddered, letting out a final haunting cry before collapsing in on itself. A swirl of black smoke and ash erupted, and the twisted flesh dissolved, leaving behind only bones that crumbled to dust within moments. Panting, Tyrion stared at the spot where the abomination had been. "Remind me never to question your knowledge of Valyrian weapons again," he said to Valyria, who barely managed a tight-lipped smile in return. Drogon let out a weary rumble, folding his torn wings. Blood trickled down his side where the black dragon had rent his scales. Valyria stroked his snout, whispering soft words in an archaic Valyrian dialect. Tyrion, Davos, Asha, and Gendry gathered around, exhausted and wounded but alive. "That creature was no ordinary beast," Davos said, wiping sweat and grime from his brow. "It was wrong." Valyria nodded. a relic of experiments the old dragon lords conducted before the doom. Attempts to fuse necromancy with draconic life. I believed them all destroyed, but clearly I was mistaken. Pen. Gendry shook his head. We've seen enough. Let's set off the biggest alarm we can to keep the rest of Westeros away from this cursed place. Tyrion's gaze traveled to Valyria. We came to stop these horrors from crossing the sea, or from being resurrected. I fear we've only seen a fraction of what might be lurking deeper in Valyria. Valyria bowed her head. Indeed. The path ahead leads to the temple in the city's heart. That is where we'll find the seat of the cult's power, and hopefully destroy it. I fell over them, each considering the monumental risk, but none spoke of turning back. They had come this far, shed blood and faced nightmares. Backing away now would only postpone a greater terror. Drogon's wounds needed tending, though. Using water from a nearby trickle and herbs Valyria had brought, they did what they could to disinfect the gash. Tyrion noticed how Drogon tolerated Valyria's careful ministrations, a sign of profound trust. After some rest they pressed on, every step taking them closer to the city's center. The architecture became grander, once the seat of Valyrian glory. Towering pillars half melted by volcanic fury, streets wide enough for 20 men abreast. Statues of dragons lined boulevards, many broken at the neck or defaced with strange runes. More than once they spotted furtive shapes scuttling away, masked cultists who vanished into side alleys. Tension coiled in their guts, each expecting another ambush. As the sun began its descent, they reached a massive structure partially collapsed but still majestic in its decay. The Temple to the 13 Flames. What remained of its facade depicted swirling dragons encircling stylized flames. Huge doors of black stone stood ajar, revealing darkness within. Drogon growled at the threshold as if sensing dread power. Inside, the air felt cold despite the heat of Valyria. Their footsteps echoed on polished marble floors strewn with ash and debris. Flickering torches gave glimpses of walls adorned with vile murals. Men and dragons bound together in arcane rituals, horrors beyond imagination. Tyrion felt his stomach churn. Davos muttered a prayer to the seven. Valyria led, sword drawn, posture rigid. In the temple's inner sanctum, they found a dais upon which stood an altar. Runes glowed scarlet across its surface, and a large brazier burned with black fire, casting dancing shadows on the pillars. A robed figure knelt before the altar, arms raised in silent devotion. More cultists lined the walls, masks drawn, chanting in a low, throbbing tone. At the sound of the intruders, they turned as one, hissing. The robed figure rose. His mask was unlike the others, golden shaped to resemble a fearsome dragon's visage with rubies set for eyes. He pointed a staff at Drogon, uttering words that caused the brazier's flames to surge. The cultists advanced in a wave. Battle erupted again, steel against obsidian, dragon fire against twisted magic. But this time the robed leader harnessed the brazier's energy, lashing out with arcs of black lightning that sizzled across the marble floor, forcing even Drogon to recoil. Valyria and Drogon could not easily approach without being seared by the magical onslaught. Asha, Gendry, and Davos fought desperately to hold off the other cultists, who wielded blades and spells with fanatical fury. Tyrion hung back, searching for any advantage. His eyes caught sight of intricate carvings on the pillars that seemed to depict the forging of Valyrian steel. Flames, runes, dragonfire. Perhaps there was a clue. A memory stirred in Tyrion, something he'd read in an old tome about the 13 Flames. He shouted to Valyria over the din, "Destroy the brazier! It's their source of power." Valyria, struggling to block a staff blow that crackled with dark energy, managed to nod. She turned to Drogon. "We must break it." But approaching it directly was lethal. The masked leader guarded it with unholy ferocity. Another arc of black lightning struck Drogon, forcing him back with a roar of pain. Desperation flashed in Varys' eyes. Then she spotted the high pillars around the dais. If Drogon could dislodge one, it might fall on the brazier. With a sharp whistle, Valyria directed Drogon upward. The great dragon soared to the temple's lofty ceiling, ignoring the swirl of dark magic that lashed at him. He crashed into a support column with his massive bulk. The stone groaned and cracked. The masked leader screamed in fury, launching more lightning. A chunk of ceiling fell, barely missing Davos, who rolled aside with a startled shout. The chanting cultists tried to scatter, but chaos reigned. Another slam from Drogon and the column tore free, toppling in a slow, grinding collapse. Tyrion and the others dove for cover. The leader tried to channel a final burst of energy, but the pillar crashed onto the brazier with unstoppable force. The black flames guttered in a violent burst, releasing a shockwave that knocked everyone to the ground. Dark smoke billowed and a howling wind whipped through the temple as the sorcery unraveled. Dazed, Tyrion looked up to see the masked leader pinned beneath the rubble, the gold mask cracked. With trembling hands, the cultist tore the mask away, revealing a face ravaged by runic burns. He croaked out a curse, eyes burning with hatred, before slumping into death. Around him, the remaining cultists fell to their knees, wailing as the black flames died. One by one they dropped their weapons, or else tried to flee into the deeper recesses of the temple. Drogon descended, battered and bleeding but triumphant. Valyria rushed to his side. He exhaled shakily, licks of flame dancing on his tongue. The brazier lay shattered beneath the pillar, its embers extinguished. An eerie hush fell, broken only by the distant rumble of Valyria's volcanic heart. Gradually, the group regrouped. Asha clutched a new gash in her arm. Davos favored one leg, and Gendry's armor was dented from multiple blows. Tyrion's heart hammered and he tasted blood where he'd bitten his lip. But they were alive. More importantly, the cult's central shrine was destroyed. "You did it," Davos said to Valyria, voice rough. "We did it." Valyria closed her eyes for a long moment, as if releasing a breath she'd held forever. This temple was the core of their power. Without it, the abominations they sought to create, the spells they wove, will unravel. The threat remains, but it is greatly diminished. Now, Asha spat on the ground. Diminished enough for us to leave this cursed place? Valyria let out a shaky laugh. Yes, we should leave before the cult regroups or the city's instability claims us. They limped out of the temple, passing through corridors littered with unconscious or dead cultists, stepping over debris that blocked half the passageways. Tyrion cast a final glance at the shattered brazier, feeling a pang of relief. The journey had cost them dearly, but they had done their part to halt an evil that could have swallowed Westeros in nightmares. Outside, the sky was tinged with the fiery glow of sunset. Smoke rose from various vents, painting the horizon in hues of orange and black. Wordless, they made their way back to the cove where Asha's ship waited. The return trek seemed both longer and shorter, as though time had warped in the aftermath of the battle. More than once, they heard distant roars or chanting, but none approached. The cult was broken, at least for now. When they reached the Kraken's fang, the sailors greeted them with wide-eyed relief. Wounds were dressed and what supplies remained were shared. Drogon settled on a rocky outcropping, letting the sea breeze cool his scorched scales. Valyria stood by him, whispering reassurances in Valyrian. Tyrion, Davos, Asha and Gendry gathered on the deck, each bearing the weight of what they'd witnessed. Asha broke the silence first. "I've seen war, drowned men, krakens, even White Walkers. But that?" Gendry nodded. "I'll drink to that." Davos let out a long breath. "We have to report this to King Bran. He must know what lurks here. The entire realm must know to leave Valyria be, or at least guard against those who might attempt to exploit it again." Tyrion studied the horizon, the sun dipping below the smoking ruins. "We will, but it won't end here. Some knowledge can never be fully contained. We've merely bought the realm time." He turned to Valyria, who walked up the gangplank quietly. She overheard his last words and nodded. "The lines of fate are tangled always. But Drogon and I will remain vigilant. If the cult resurfaces, we will do what must be done." "Valyria, will you return with us?" Tyrion asked gently. Valyria looked to the battered city behind her, then at Drogon's wounded form. "We need to heal. Drogon's injuries are deep, and my own spirit is not unscathed. Perhaps we will stay a while in these waters, ensuring no further abominations rise. Then we shall come to Westeros, if you'll have us, when the time is right." Tyrion reached out and gripped her hand, a rare gesture of warmth. "You saved us. You may have saved the entire realm. You will always find welcome at King's Landing." "Nay, Sarlal." Valyria gave a faint, grateful smile, then withdrew to be near Drogon. The rest of the crew prepared to cast off, aware that lingering in Valyria was perilous. The sails were unfurled at dawn's first light, carrying them away from the cursed peninsula. Tyrion watched the receding ruins, a swirl of conflicting emotions in his heart. He thought of Daenerys, of how her dreams of breaking the wheel had ended in tragedy. Now a new scion of Valyria walked the earth, tempered by the horrors she had faced. Perhaps this time, that legacy would serve a cause greater than conquest. The return voyage was marked by uneasy quiet. Each night, the sailors and knights drank their ale in subdued conversation, occasionally glancing at the horizon as if fearing some monstrous shape would emerge from the sea. But no abomination followed. No cult ship pursued. The black shadow of Drogon was absent now, somewhere over the smoking sea. By the time they reached King's Landing, the men and women aboard the Kraken's Fang had the harrowed, distant look of those who survived an impossibility. Word of their arrival spread quickly. Bran summoned them to court, where Tyrion and Davos delivered their account. Gasps and exclamations rippled through the assembled lords and ladies. The details of the monstrous abomination, the black lightning, the twisted temple, all painted a chilling portrait of Valyria's hidden perils. The significance of Vaera's role, her valiant stand with Drogon, was not lost on them. When the story concluded, Bran's voice filled the hall. "We owe a debt to all who took this risk." He acknowledged Gendry, Asha, and the others. "Their courage preserved us from a threat we scarcely understood. Let it be known that from this day on, Valyria is declared a forbidden land. No ship sails there under the Crown's banner. Our vigilance will remain, and we will remember Vaera of Valyria, who stands guard alongside her dragon." The weeks that followed were a haze of healing and reflection. Reports came in that ships venturing too close to Valyria witnessed great columns of smoke, and the distant silhouette of Drogon aloft, patrolling the skies. No new cult activity was reported, and gradually the matter slid into rumor and legend. Some claimed Vaera and Drogon had vanished forever, carrying the last vestiges of Valyria's legacy with them. Others swore they spotted her on a stony beach, feeding Drogon fish, or glimpsed her perched on the highest ruin in the city's heart, a silent sentinel. But King's Landing did not forget. Bran did not forget. And neither did Tyrion. Each day, he would sit in the Red Keep's library, poring over accounts of Valyrian magic, searching for any reference to the abomination they fought and the twisted cult that dared to harness it. He left notes and journals that might guide future generations. History taught him that knowledge, even dark knowledge, was best aired to prevent it from festering unseen. Peace continued, albeit tinged with the knowledge of hidden evils. The small folk carried on, planting crops, tending families, living their lives free from the tyranny of old wars. The lords and ladies busied themselves with minor disputes, alliances, and feasts. Over time, the memory of Drogon's shadow flying over the Red Keep was replaced by more immediate concerns: harvest yields, trade routes, personal ambitions. Yet on certain nights, especially when storms rumbled across the narrow sea, some would stand on the ramparts of the city and watch lightning flicker on the horizon. They would wonder if another monstrous shape lurked in that gloom, waiting for a chance to conquer or corrupt. The knowledge that Vaera and Drogon had ventured forth to stand against such nightmares offered a measure of comfort. In the minds of many, Drogon had not just returned with a rider, he had returned with a guardian of the realm, one shaped by the ashes of Valyria rather than consumed by them. In time, ballads were composed, songs of the strange rider and the last living dragon. Minstrels found new verses to weave into the epic of House Targaryen, albeit from a safe distance. The name Vaera became synonymous with courage and mystery. Some believed she was the ghost of Daenerys, reincarnated to right the wrongs of the past. Others said she was a prophecy fulfilled and heir to the unbroken spirit of the Freehold. But only a handful truly knew her story, and even they could only guess at her ultimate destiny. For Vaera herself, the journey continued. She and Drogon wandered the outskirts of the smoking sea, ensuring that no further abominations threatened to rise. She returned to ruined temples to collapse tunnels and sanctuaries, thwarting the cult's attempts to rebuild. Whenever she closed her eyes, she still heard echoes of the chanting, still smelled the sulfur and blood. But she also felt a profound sense of purpose. And Drogon, for his part, seemed content to fight by her side, forging a bond that transcended mortal words. Often, Vera's thoughts drifted to Westeros. She recalled King Bran's steady gaze, Tyrion's wry insights, Davos' unwavering loyalty, Asha's brave grin, and Gendry's earnest resolve. She wondered if she would one day cross the sea to stand among them again. Her blood was of Valyria, but her actions forged a connection that bound her to the fate of Westeros. Perhaps in time she would return to the Seven Kingdoms, not as a conqueror or a pretender, but as a friend and protector. Perhaps she would help shape a future where dragons soared, not as instruments of domination, but as living wonders that reminded the world of both power and responsibility. Yet for the moment, the haunted shores of Valyria remained her domain. She stood watch over broken spires, an oath sworn in silence, ensuring that the black magic of the past would not spill over into the present. The wind carried her name across the sea, weaving it into the songs of minstrels and the hushed tales of travelers. And Drogon's roar echoed through the ancient ruins, a living testament to the resilience of dragons and the humans they chose to ride beside. In the end, the realm would remember that once, in its darkest hour, a black dragon had returned from the ashes, carrying a rider with fire in her blood and determination in her soul. Together they defied nightmares older than empires, fighting not for crowns or thrones, but for the fragile hope that life might endure. And in that choice, in that singular powerful choice, they reminded the world that destiny was not always written in the pages of doom. Sometimes, a single spark of courage could reignite the light, even in a land where shadows once devoured everything in flame. In the wake of their triumph in the Temple of the 13 Flames, rumor blossomed across every corner of Westeros. Ports and hamlets, mountain strongholds and dusty crossroads all buzzed with talk of the twisted dragon Vera and her companions had destroyed. The shock of hearing that foul sorcery had nearly reawakened Valyria's old horrors shook many, yet most believed the danger was ended when the temple collapsed and its dark brazier was shattered. The small folk were content with that bit of reassurance. They wanted to believe that, at last, the realm had peace. But those who knew the true nature of such evils, those who had walked the smoking sea, felt its breath on their faces, and come away battered yet alive, understood that the blackness festering in Valyria was only mostly contained. Darkness, after all, could be patient. In King's Landing, the rebuilt city thrived under Bran's reign. The scars of war were less visible with each passing year, replaced by neat stretches of new architecture and improved roads. Once, under the grip of destructive monarchs, the city had been in near-perpetual crisis. Now, with a calmer hand on the throne, and Tyrion Lannister guiding the small council through methodical reforms, life for commoners was more stable than many could remember. Yet, beneath this veneer of civility lay the complicated undercurrents of fear and caution. The realm remembered how the last dragon rider had scorched King's Landing in a wave of madness. They remembered the hush of winter, the approach of the dead. And now they remembered the abominations from across the sea, disrupted but not entirely destroyed. In the days following Tyrion's return, a quiet unease settled in the Red Keep. Ravens from Tarth and Storm's End brought inquiries, mostly well-intentioned or politely curious. What had really transpired in Valyria? Could the darkness strike again? Did the Crown plan another expedition? More disturbing reports arrived from the narrow sea. A few scattered ships had begun to vanish near the smoking sea's perimeter. While it was not uncommon for a handful of vessels to founder upon hidden reefs or vanish during storms, the stories coming in had a sharper edge. Sailors swore they saw flashes of crimson light on the horizon, or heard unearthly roars that set their blood running cold. Tyrion and Davos, in their capacity as hand and master of ships, convened quietly with the king to discuss what steps might be taken. Davos, so usually measured in his words, expressed concern that the cult was not as broken as they had hoped. "They've lost their temple," he said in a low tone, "but the devout can be fanatical. They might have regrouped somewhere deeper in that cursed city. Even a cornered viper can strike." "No." Bran, gazing out over the courtyard, gave no direct answer. His face, always calm, seemed tinged with a distant sadness. "I have seen glimpses," he said at last. "Something stirs in Valyria still, shadows that cling to the bones of that empire. We must be watchful." Tyrion gently fiddled with a quill, tapping it on the surface of a map. "We can instruct ships to steer well clear. But traders and adventurers are drawn to rumor like moths to flame. Some might attempt to find lost treasures, or even hope for a glimpse of Drogon. And not all who go may be innocent. There could be unscrupulous sorts, or even cell sales hired by lords with more ambition than sense, attempting to harness any leftover sorcery. The king nodded. We'll warn them, but we cannot force every captain to obey. Westeros must rely on caution and the knowledge we've gleaned. For now that will have to suffice. Yet caution alone could not quell the dark curiosity that swirled around Valyria. Over the next moons, several minor lords who had grown rich on trade began sending hush-hush expeditions to the Smoking Sea. Their motivations varied. Some simply wanted the rumored riches hidden in the molten ruins. Others dreamed of harnessing old Valyrian spells for power. A handful of them returned with strange trinkets or lumps of glassy black stone, fueling gossip in taverns from Dorne to the north. But more than a few ships failed to return at all, lost to those boiling waters or the watchers in the gloom. Amid these tremors, Bran's court received an unexpected visitor, one of the few survivors of such a clandestine expedition. He was a Lyseni Cellsail named Selwyn Glasseye, so nicknamed for the artificial orb of polished quartz he wore in his empty socket. Arriving in King's Landing half-dead from thirst and malnourishment, he babbled about things in the deep that pulled ships under, about shadows dancing over the waves at night. Tyrion interviewed him in private, gleaning that the expedition had indeed tried to land on Valyrian shores. They were met by masked men chanting in the old language, who somehow made the water itself churn with unnatural violence. Though Tyrion took the man's words with a grain of salt, fear and delirium could twist accounts. He felt certain that the cult was not gone. When pressed to recall any sign of Drogon or Valyria, Selwyn Glasseye's single good eye brightened with a flicker of awe. I saw the great black beast in the sky," he whispered. He set upon those cultists like the stranger himself, but there were so many of them, and the woman with the white hair was there too, but we couldn't get close. We ran, or tried to. The sea swallowed us? He shuddered, tears glinting in that one good eye. I barely made it out. Many of my mates did not. After that, he lapsed into a near catatonic state. Tyrion ordered that the man be given lodging and healing, though whether his soul could ever recover was an open question. What Tyrion gleaned, however, was that Valyria and Drogon still waged a secret war against whatever remnants of the cult lingered. He made a note to personally keep track of any further rumors. A part of him hoped that Valyria might send a raven to the crown, but perhaps she was too embattled, or perhaps she possessed no means to do so from those dread shores. Time stretched on, and the subdued worry within the Red Keep never fully faded. Lord Davos advocated for a more direct approach. We know Valyria's fighting them on her own. Perhaps we should send help, even a small armed company supported by archers or warships. But others on the council objected. The realm was not ready to commit large forces into Valyria again, nor could it risk a repeat of the horrors that had unfolded during their last excursion. Memories of black flame and twisted dragons weighed heavily. In the end, Bran advised caution and watchfulness. Meanwhile, beyond the sea, Valyria's battles continued. She and Drogon had driven the cult deeper into the labyrinthine ruins, burning out their hidden shrines and scattering their adherents. In small skirmishes across the broken spires, Valyria found that each success was costly. The cult's ability to conjure illusions and harness pieces of old magic meant that every victory felt tainted, as though the land itself resisted her. Sleep became scarce. She would find a corner of a half-collapsed tower to rest, Drogon dozing beside her with one eye half open, but her mind never truly stilled. She often dreamed of the monstrous abomination they had slain, of chanting echoes that sounded like Daenerys' final cry in the Red Keep. Sometimes, Valyria felt bitterness that she fought alone, but then she would recall the fresh memories of Tyrion, Davos, Asha and Gendry risking their lives alongside her. She told herself that they had done enough for one war-weary realm, that she, as the chosen rider of Drogon, possessed the blood and responsibility to cleanse Valyria. The heat, the ash-filled air, the crumbling pathways, and the hiss of volcanic vents became her new normal. Whenever she found a vantage high enough, she would gaze westward, imagining the shining towers of King's Landing, the green fields of the Reach, the stony hills of the Vale, the ice-strewn expanses of the north. Perhaps one day she would see them again, not as an outcast or a distant savior, but as a friend. For now, though, her duty lay here, in these forsaken spires. One evening, While she and Drogon scouted the southwestern edge of the once great city, they came upon an encampment that reeked of dark ritual. The remains of freshly killed animals lay in a circle, gutted in a pattern that twisted Valyria's stomach. The cultists were gone, but signs of their presence were stark. Runes scrawled in old Valyrian script, describing an attempt to create another monstrous hybrid, though smaller in scale than the abomination they had faced. Valyria trembled with rage. She set the entire encampment aflame, cleansing it with Drogon's breath until nothing but blackened char remained. Days later, she discovered a group of 3 ragged men, survivors of a merchant vessel, huddled in the rubble of what had once been a Valyrian warehouse. They trembled at the sight of Drogon, but Valyria coaxed them into calm. They told her how their ship had come seeking salvageable relics or shards of Valyrian steel. Instead, they found themselves captured by cultists, who killed most of their crew for a sacrificial rite. These 3 managed to slip away amid the chaos. Valyria offered them what little food she had, pointed them toward the nearest coastline, and guided them out of the city under Drogon's watchful, circling flight. The men thanked her profusely, though with lingering fear that she might be some haunting spirit of the Targaryen line. Valyria told them simply, "Return home and warn others to stay away. This land devours the living." She began to realize that her solo efforts, while valiant, might never fully root out the cult's corruption. Valyria was vast, its labyrinth of tunnels stretching beneath the city for countless miles. Entire sections of the old capital remained collapsed or partially flooded with molten slag. If the cult kept to these deeper recesses, then Valyria's search was akin to hunting a serpent in a dark sea. She and Drogon fought in skirmishes, destroyed shrines, and yet no matter how many times they faced the chanting thralls, more always seemed to appear. She began to suspect that the cult drew new acolytes from across the ocean, luring them with false promises of power. Her nights turned ever more restless. The shadows of those huge towers, half submerged in lava, seemed to watch her with an almost sentient malice. She remembered King Bran's words. Sometimes, knowledge can be your greatest ally or your greatest foe. Perhaps the time had come to seek a different kind of knowledge. Taking a risk, Valyria ventured deeper into the oldest archives of the Valyrian capital, half-flooded halls where obsidian pillars jutted like teeth from the ground. She discovered sealed vaults guarded by mechanical traps, relics of an age when the Valyrian freehold's ingenuity rivaled its cruelty. Within these vaults lay tomes that seemed to whisper when she touched them, scrolls that flaked with ancient dust at the gentlest breath. It was in one such vault that she found mention of a dreaded name, Carnax the Undying, an arch-sorcerer of Valyria rumored to have surpassed the normal, mortal lifespan through vile necromantic pacts. The texts hinted that he had created a secret refuge beneath the city, a place called the Ossuary of Whispers. There, he performed experiments on captured dragons, forging twisted hybrids that might never truly die. Valyria felt an icy sickness in her stomach as she read the accounts, half in archaic Valyrian, half in cryptic symbols. Some of the sketches resembled the abominations she and the others had faced. Worse yet, the text spoke of a grand design, a ritual called Astrix Morga, which was intended to bring forth a cataclysmic merging of draconic and demonic essence, a second doom, but this time harnessed for a single purpose: the unassailable ascension of Carnax. Though Carnax was assuredly long dead, Valyria feared that the cult sought to resurrect his legacy. Their scattered enclaves, the monstrous experiments, the brazier in the temple, perhaps all of these were stepping stones toward repeating that ultimate ritual. She recalled the black lightning that nearly felled Drogon, the robed leader with the golden mask, the illusions that made the walls seem to shift. It all fit a pattern. Whether the cult had the means to complete Astrix Morga was unclear, but the texts she held made her realize that the stakes were impossibly high. She could keep striking at them one shrine at a time, or she could seek out their seat of power, this rumored ossuary of whispers, and confront them in a final confrontation. In that cold, dusty vault, torchlight flickering on centuries-old frescoes, Valyria felt a surge of loneliness. She thought of Tyrion's sharp wit, Davos' compassion, Asha's fierce courage, Gendry's steadfast heart, and even King Bran's calm wisdom. She thought of how they'd once united to bring down a terror that threatened the world. She alone was formidable, but maybe not enough to face an entire doomsday cult. She ran her fingers over the pages of brittle parchment, the symbols of nightmares dancing by the wavering flame. Then she closed the book, eyes determined. She realized she had to reach out somehow, to the realm across the sea. She could not do this alone. Gathering her courage, Vera decided to create a message. But she had no direct means of sending a raven across the vast ocean. The old Valyrian rookeries, if they existed, were decimated by the doom. Even capturing a living raven here was an impossible feat. None nested in this scorched place. She considered writing a letter and entrusting it to some passing ship, but that carried far too many risks. Instead, she turned to an older, more arcane solution, a variation of the glass candle lore that was rumored to have come from the same empire that had once been Valyria's rival, the sorcerers of Old Volantis and beyond. According to scraps of knowledge she'd found in these archives, certain polished obsidian candles, lit by living flame and fueled with blood, could bridge great distances in dreams. In the earliest days, some Targaryens had apparently attempted to harness that method to communicate with each other, though few had the gift. Attempting to glean the method from memory, she spent days searching for a large shard of untainted obsidian, clear of the cult's runic carvings. She eventually found one in a collapsed library annex, half buried beneath a statue of a majestic long-dead dragon. Carefully, she extracted it from the rubble. Next, she prepared a small brazier of her own, though not of the black flame variety the cult used, but rather a simple flame lit from driftwood she'd collected near the coastline. She placed the obsidian shard in the flame, pricking her finger to let a single drop of blood sizzle on its surface. Then she focused, drawing upon that spark of magic that lived within her bloodline, the legacy of old Valyria that allowed her to bond with Drogon. Night fell, and the ruins around her felt more silent than ever. The obsidian candle flickered, greenish and dim at first. She steadied her breathing. She thought of a distant weirwood throne, of pale eyes that had seen centuries unfold in visions, of a man known as Bran the Broken, king of the Six Kingdoms. She tried to concentrate on the sense of him, the intangible presence that once weighed upon her in the throne room. She whispered words in High Valyrian, in a half-remembered chant that the old text described as bridging space through dream. At first, nothing happened. Then, the air around her seemed to shimmer. A faint swirl of color flickered across the surface of the candle, turning from green to a faint azure, then to a pale silver reminiscent of moonlight. Valyria found her eyelids growing heavy, and she slumped forward, drawn into a swirl of images. She saw fleeting pictures: the Red Keep's courtyard, Tyrion conferring with Davos over a large map, Gendry in a smithy, forging a new blade, Asha leaning over the prow of a ship. She saw Bran, too, alone in his solar, perched on a carved wooden seat, his eyes distant as if lost in a vision. She tried to form words in this dreamlike space, to call out to Bran. She felt an odd pulling sensation, as though she stood in a corridor of swirling mist. Somewhere ahead a raven croaked, and a door opened. She walked through it, or perhaps simply drifted, and found herself in a dimly lit hall that might have been the Red Keep, only its features were blurred. At the far end, Bran sat in his wheeled chair, his head turned as if listening to an unseen visitor. He looked up, and his pale eyes found hers through the haze. "Valyria," he said quietly, surprise lining his features. "I see you. Where are you?" "Ah?" She strained, the effort of maintaining this vision tugging at her mind. "In Valyria," she whispered, her voice echoing. "They are not destroyed, Bran. The cult is still strong. They planned something worse, something called Asterix Morga. I need help." Bran's gaze flickered with concern. "You found a way to speak through glass and dream. Old magic. Your message is heard, but do not linger. The strain is dangerous." Valyria felt the world tilt. It took all her will not to lose the connection. "Send any who are willing," she said, "or warn them. I cannot cleanse Valyria alone. Drogon and I, we fight constantly, but it's not enough. This place is enormous." Bran's figure in the vision nodded. "I will call the small council. Tyrion, Davos, they will hear of this. But be warned, the realm is fearful. They might not muster an army. Your best chance may be a small band of proven souls." Valyria's heart pounded. "I will take whatever help can be spared. Look for me at the Smoke Shore, 3 leagues east of the city's gates. There's a cove safe for landing." I'll keep watch. If no one comes, I will go on alone. Oh. Bran's voice echoed in her mind, strangely layered with the cawing of a crow. I will do what I can. Take care, Valyria of Valyria. Then the candle flames sputtered, and the entire dream collapsed into darkness. Valyria jolted awake, drenched in sweat. The obsidian shard lay cold and dull in the brazier's ashes, her head aching from the strain. Had any of it been real? Or had she merely succumbed to the illusions of a forsaken place? Then she recalled Bran's parted lips, the sense of his presence, and a flicker of hope burned in her chest. If anyone could have heard her, it was Bran. If any realm possessed the capacity to answer, it was Westeros. Sure enough, across the sea, Bran woke in his bedchamber with his own brow damp. Though it was not the first time he had walked in strange dreams, this was the first occasion he'd ever felt another mind reach out from so far. He knew it to be real. In the morning, he summoned Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, who was in the capital on business, and a few trusted knights, among them Sir Brian of Tarth, who had insisted on remaining in the city to protect the king. He recounted Valyria's warning, calmly and without embellishment. The listeners exchanged glances of worry. So she's calling for help, Tyrion said, steepling his fingers. That means her war against this cult isn't going well. Davos exhaled slowly. If she's risking such dangerous magic just to warn us, it must be dire. We can't ignore it. Asha, who had sailed back to the Iron Islands to oversee a dispute, was not present, but Gendry stepped forward. I'll go, he said immediately. I owe her my life for what she did in that temple, and if she's in trouble, I'm not about to sit idle. Tyrion's expression was thoughtful. You'll go, but with whom? We can't send a large force. As we learned, an army is not only too cumbersome, it's also an invitation for the cult to strike en masse. A small, skilled band is best. The question is, can we muster enough volunteers for such a suicidal mission? Davos gave Gendry a solemn nod, respecting his courage. I will join you. The seas are in my blood, and I've walked in darkness before. A faint hint of old sadness crossed his features, perhaps recalling the tragedies of his life. I won't let that young woman stand alone if I can help it. Tyrion took a slow breath. Very well, you'll need a ship, and I know just the one. Asha Greyjoy's prized longship, the Kraken's Eye, is moored in King's Landing for repairs. I doubt she'll mind if we commandeer it for this cause, given that she's had dealings with Valyria before, or at least we can ask her blessings. Bran glanced out the window. Choose your companions carefully, Davos. The cult's magic is potent. You will need cunning as much as steel. He paused. I wish I could accompany you in more than spirit, but my place is here, to watch over the realm. I will do what I can to see through the eyes of ravens, though that part of my power is not as strong so far from Westeros. The next day, word spread quietly through the Red Keep that an expedition was forming. Not many were eager to volunteer for a journey back into the smoking sea, but a handful of knights who had proven their valor, some who had faced the White Walkers years ago, stepped forward. Sir Balman Rivers, a seasoned fighter with half the face pockmarked by grayscale, asked to join, citing a desire to repay the realm for a second chance at life. Two other warriors, a husband and wife pair from the Reach named Rowan and Lana Tarly, petitioned to be included, determined to show that House Tarly stood ready to defend the realm even outside its borders. Tyrion approved them after some discussion, for they were known as skilled knights with a close bond that had seen them through many battles. A day before the voyage was set to begin, to everyone's surprise, Queen Sansa Stark of the North arrived by ship. Though she was no longer styled as a queen since the North had seceded, the courtesy of addressing her as such lingered in some corners. The truth was that the North's independence was more symbolic now. Friendly ties kept the realm intact if loosely. Sansa's presence in King's Landing caused a stir, as she rarely left Winterfell. She came to the Red Keep incognito, traveling with a small retinue, determined not to disrupt the city's life. Word reached Tyrion that Sansa was requesting an immediate audience. He found her in Bran's solar, conversing quietly with the king. She was tall, slender, her red hair pulled back in practical braids, her bearing regal as ever. A faint smile touched her lips when Tyrion entered, though sorrow lined her eyes. I heard rumors, she said in her soft, cool voice, that you plan to sail into the smoking sea again. Tyrion gave a short nod. You've heard true enough, my lady. Davos will command the expedition. She glanced at Bran, then back to Tyrion. I intend to send one of my best with you. Sir Barth Snow, a loyal knight of the North. He was instrumental in quelling several pockets of bandits in the neck. I know he's not the only valiant swordsman here, but if you'll have him, consider it a token of the North's support, and a show of good faith. Tyrion bowed slightly. We'd welcome any man you trust, my lady. We could certainly use skilled blades. Wrong. Sansa studied him, and then Bran, with an intensity that suggested she was weighing more than simple altruism. I also want a direct account of events in Valyria, she continued. Word from the south is often filtered through rumor by the time it reaches Winterfell. If Sir Barth can bear witness, the North will believe. We've had enough of ignoring warnings until it's too late. Bran offered her a small, understanding smile. I know you worry. The North has faced so many calamities. But rest assured, we won't let this threaten our land. Nay. Sansa's gaze flicked momentarily to the windows. Let us hope. I've seen too much war and sorrow to discount the possibility of darker forces returning. She turned back to Tyrion, a subtle steel in her words. Be safe. Bring my knight back alive if you can. Tyrion merely nodded, not making false promises. Even with the combined might of skilled knights, Davos' maritime experience, Gendry's bravery, and the knowledge gleaned from the last expedition, venturing into Valyria was fraught with peril. He felt an odd ache of anticipation, remembering the last time they'd set foot in that land. Their band had survived by the narrowest margin. Now they were going back, possibly to face something even worse. So it was that, 2 mornings later, a small group of ships prepared to depart King's Landing's docks. The largest and swiftest among them was indeed the Kraken's Eye, on loan from Asha Greyjoy, who had been tracked down in the city's taverns and, after a few curses and much scowling, grudgingly agreed. She even decided to join the voyage at the last minute, claiming she refused to let anyone else steer my precious ship into the gates of hell. The final count of the party included Davos, Asha, Gendry, Sir Barth Snow from the north, Sir Balman Rivers, the Tarly Knights, and a small complement of loyal sailors and guards. Tyrion himself did not embark this time. His role as hand bound him to remain in King's Landing, but he watched from the docks, a knot of worry pulling at his chest. He and Davos clasped hands before departure. I trust you to make the wise calls, my friend, Tyrion murmured. If it becomes too dangerous, if you suspect that your presence won't tip the scales, turn back. The realm can't afford to lose more heroes. Davos nodded. I'll weigh the cost carefully, my lord, but I also remember what Vera did for us. If she calls for help, I'll not abandon her lightly. Tyrion smiled grimly. She has earned that loyalty, no doubt. He turned to Gendry, offering a handshake. Keep that strong arm ready, Lord Baratheon, and come back in one piece. Gendry flashed a quick grin, though tension tightened his features. I'll try. The sails were hoisted, the anchor weighed, and the Kraken's Eye slipped from the harbor onto waters that shimmered under a bright midday sun. A ragged cheer from the dockworkers followed them, though it quickly died as the ship pulled away. Somewhere high above, a single raven circled, a reminder that Bran's eyes might follow them even into distant seas. The voyage across the narrow sea and through the stepstones took weeks. The mood aboard ranged from cautious optimism to quiet dread. Asha barked orders at her sailors, more subdued than usual, as though weighed down by memory. She had survived one terrifying mission into the smoking sea already. To do it again seemed to push the boundary of fate. But, if she felt fear, she hid it beneath her usual bravado. Davos spent hours poring over charts to find the safest route. Not that there truly was a safe route. The smoking sea was known to shift unpredictably, steam vents opening and closing in the watery depths, volcanic tremors shaking the seafloor. Gendry sparred with the Tarly Knights to keep their skills honed, while Sir Barth Snow of the North quietly observed, rarely speaking unless necessary. Balman Rivers mostly kept to himself, occasionally passing the time by carving small wooden figurines that he claimed brought good luck. At night, the group gathered on the deck around a single lantern for warmth. Asha told stories of Ironborn raids. Davos shared a few old smuggler tales, and Gendry recalled memories of traveling with Arya Stark in younger days. Sometimes they laughed. Sometimes the conversation drifted to uneasy silence. When the wind was calm, they could hear the ocean breathing around them, the quiet hush of waves like the lullaby of a serpent. Eventually, the air grew heavy with the tang of sulfur. Clouds thickened overhead, blotting out the sun. The horizon ahead took on that familiar grim aspect, a haze of steam that clung to the water like a wraith. The smoking sea loomed. The sailors muttered prayers. Asha looked into the gloom, recalling the path that had led them to the cove last time. Carefully, she navigated around rocky outcroppings and swirling eddies of hot water. No one spoke above a whisper. They had instructions from Vera to find a cove east of the old city gates, presumably the same area where the group had anchored before. But the coastline's shape seemed different, perhaps further collapsed or altered by subterranean shifts. At one point, the ship jolted as if hitting an underwater ridge, but they managed to maneuver free without too much damage. The tension was suffocating, everyone remembering the horrors that lurked in these waters. At last, they spotted a stretch of black sand beach framed by jagged cliffs. The cove's mouth was partially concealed by a massive chunk of collapsed tower. It looked precarious, but passable. Asha guided the Kraken's eye in carefully, ordering half the sails trimmed and the rowers to keep a slow, steady pace. The water in the cove was calm, an inky mirror reflecting the stormy sky. Once they were near enough to land, the group scanned the shore for any sign of Valyria or Drogon. At first, all they saw was the bleak, ashen coastline and the skeletons of twisted trees. Then they heard the low rumble of a dragon's growl echo off the cliffs. A moment later, Drogon swooped into view, massive black wings stirring up ash and sand. He made a wide pass overhead, the sheer wind force of his flight rattling the ship's rigging. The sailors paled, even those who had seen dragons before, for Drogon seemed even larger than memory, scars etched along his flanks. "Steady!" Davos called, though the command was scarcely needed. The men froze in place. Drogon circled, and then Valyria appeared astride his back. With an uncanny grace, the dragon landed on the beach, sending plumes of ash swirling. Valyria dismounted, raising an arm in greeting. Despite the gloom, they could see the glimmer of silver in her hair. She looked thinner than before, her features sharper, but her stance remained upright, determined. A boat was lowered, and Davos, Gendry, and Asha rowed to shore, accompanied by the Tarly Knights. Sir Barth and Balman Rivers remained behind to oversee the unloading of supplies, watchful of any sign of ambush. As soon as Davos' boots crunched on black sand, Valyria strode forward, relief evident in her eyes. "You came," she said, her voice hoarse. "I wasn't sure if my message reached the king." Davos nodded, stepping up to clasp her forearm. "It reached him indeed. We couldn't ignore your call. Are you all right?" She exhaled, a half laugh escaping her lips. "As all right as one can be here. Things have worsened. The cult is stronger than I realized. They've mustered forces from across Essos. I've spent weeks burning shrines and chasing their adherents, but it's like cutting the head off a hydra. I needed help." Gendry rested a hand on the pommel of his sword, scanning the surroundings. "We're here, and we'll do what we can. Just lead the way." "No." Valyria nodded, glancing over at Drogon, who crouched protectively, eyes fixed on the newcomers. "Let's set up a camp near that cliffside. Drogon will keep watch from above. The cult knows we're here, but we can carve out a small foothold. Then we talk strategy." Asha whistled softly, surveying the massive dragon. "He's bigger than I remember, and the scars. You two have been busy." Valyria gave a tense nod. "I lost count of the battles. He's taken too many wounds. The deeper city is like a fortress for them. They summon illusions. They enslave creatures best left unnamed. We'll face more than we did in the temple." Now. Over the following hours, the expedition party established a makeshift base, hauling crates of supplies from the ship. They erected a few tents, posted guards, and set up an impromptu watchtower using a portion of the cliff that provided a commanding view of the coastline. Valyria seemed oddly heartened by their presence. These were not an army, but they were skilled, resourceful individuals who had already proven themselves in this environment once. Drogon took flight intermittently, scouting. Through the swirling mists and ash-laden winds, He was a living sentinel, a beacon of both hope and raw power. In the flickering torchlight of the largest tent, Valyria gathered everyone to explain what she had learned about the cult's ultimate plan. The group listened intently, expressions darkening as she recounted the rumors of Astrix Morga, the ritual that threatened to replicate a catastrophic second doom in miniature. One the cult believed they could control. She described the notes she had found regarding Karnax the Undying and his ossuary of whispers somewhere beneath the city's central spires. If they succeed, she concluded, they might be able to create more twisted dragons, or even something worse. Perhaps a being shaped from demon fire and draconic essence. I can't say with certainty, but we have to assume it would be unstoppable. Davos ran a hand over his beard. So the best course is to strike at the heart. This ossuary, destroy their leadership, disrupt the ritual. Better that than trying to fight them piece by piece. Gendry nodded. We've done something like that before. The temple, but that was on the surface. Now we're talking about catacombs deep beneath the city. Not just catacombs, something akin to a labyrinth. Valyria's voice was soft but resolute. Yes, we'll have to venture underground, Drogo. She stopped herself, recalling the dragon's size. Drogon likely can't accompany us into the tightest passages, but he can wreak havoc from above, maybe draw out some of their defenders. Asha crossed her arms. If we do that, we risk splitting our forces. Half of us in the catacombs, half dealing with who knows how many cultists on the surface. Plus the city structure is unstable. One good quake, and we might be buried. Sir Barth Snow, the quiet knight from the north, spoke for the first time. His voice was level, carrying the crisp accent of Winterfell. Perhaps a two-pronged approach. One group remains above ground, led by Drogon, creating a distraction. The other group descends beneath the city to reach the ossuary. The cult won't know where to focus. If we have a means to communicate or time our efforts, we could maximize confusion. Nilwyn. Valyria nodded slowly, pondering. We can arrange signals with dragonfire. A single pass overhead might mean move forward. Two might mean retreat. It's crude, but better than nothing. She studied the faces around her, seeing fear and resolve in equal measure. This will be more dangerous than anything we've done before. The cult's magic is at its strongest in their lair. They can conjure illusions, manipulate the environment. We must be prepared for anything. Davos' gaze lingered on her. And what about you? Will you lead the underground force? She hesitated. Part of me wants to. I know the city, but Drogon is my responsibility, and having a dragon in the sky is our best advantage against any large-scale mobilization. Gendry interjected. What if we reverse that? Drogon can keep watch above, but you go below. Dragons can't quite be told what to do, can they? He might protect us or attack the cult, even if you're not physically present to direct him. The bond you share could guide him to some extent. No. Valyria considered it. She had rarely been separated from Drogon since forging their bond. The idea of leaving him on his own, even for a short while, twisted her heart with concern. But Gendry made a solid point. Drogon had proven fiercely independent at times, especially when roused by danger. He might circle overhead, sense her proximity below, and still act to protect their interests. In the end, she nodded. You're right. I'll go below. Drogon will do what he can. If it becomes dire, I'll try to call him. There's a mental link, though it's faint across distances. Now. With the plan broadly set, they spent the next day preparing for the assault. Valyria guided them to a vantage point from which they could see the city's main gates, or what remained of them, two massive pillars of fused black stone, flanking a wide rubble-strewn avenue that once led to Valyria's grand palace. Countless collapsed buildings formed a jagged skyline, half of them leaning precariously. Plumes of steam and smoke escaped fissures in the ground. Occasionally they spotted robed figures skulking among the debris. That evening Gendry, Davos Asha, Sir Barth, Sir Balman Rivers, the Tarly couple, and a handful of chosen fighters prepared to infiltrate the city in two teams. The first, smaller group, led by Asha, would remain on the surface with Drogon, harassing and scattering any large gatherings of cultists. They would draw the defenders into the open if possible, giving the second group, lulled by Valyria, space to descend into the ossuary. Davos chose to accompany Valyria, as did Gendry. Asha objected, wanting Gendry on the surface for his prowess, but Gendry insisted his place was at Vera's side. He had faced horrors with her once and would do so again. Night draped Valyria in a cloak of foreboding. The sky glowed faintly with volcanic embers, reflecting off the haze like a sinister aurora. The infiltration team slipped through the outer ring of ruins, hearts pounding with every crunch of ash underfoot. In the distance, they heard Drogon's roar and saw a burst of orange flame arc into the sky. That was their signal to move. The cult would focus on the great black dragon, or so they hoped. Valyria led them through side alleys that twisted between skeletal buildings. She had walked these paths in her earlier hunts, often in daylight. At night, the city was a labyrinth of flickering shadows cast by pockets of molten rock. More than once, they had to halt as illusions skittered across the edges of vision, shapes that might have been cultists or phantoms conjured by the city's tortured magic. Sir Balman Rivers cursed under his breath when he nearly walked into what looked like a gaping chasm, only to find it was a trick of the light. Eventually, they reached a wide courtyard overlooked by cracked statues of ancient Valyrian warlords. In the center lay a partially collapsed fountain, its water long since gone. Valyria pointed to a gap in the far wall, leading downward. "That's the entrance to the deeper tunnels," she whispered. "From here on, it's unknown territory. I've only ventured a little way down before turning back." "No, addition." They lit torches, though sparingly, for they did not want to announce their presence too brazenly. The passageway beyond was lined with stone steps that descended at a steep angle. The walls bore depictions of dragons swirling amid flames, many defaced with fresh runes in red paint, or possibly blood. The air grew colder as they descended, a stark contrast to the city's usual oppressive heat. A hush seemed to press around them, as if the stone itself demanded silence. Deeper they went, and the smell of damp rot mingled with ancient dust. The route split multiple times into branching corridors. Valyria used her prior knowledge of Valyrian architecture, and an old map drawn from scraps in the archives, to guide them as best she could toward what she suspected was the central sublevel. Their footsteps echoed in the gloom, each scuff on the stone feeling too loud. Then they sensed more than saw movement ahead. A flicker of shadow, the scrape of feet. Everyone tensed. Valyria gestured for quiet, stepping forward with Davos and Gendry at her side. Sir Balman Rivers and the Tarly Knights brought up the rear, each gripping a sword or spear. In the corridor, they came upon a cluster of cultists huddled around a statue, chanting in low voices that reverberated with strange harmonics. The statue itself was half buried in a side niche, depicting a Valyrian priest with arms raised in supplication. The cultists had defaced it with runes and bound a trembling figure at its base, a sacrificial victim, blood dripping from a wound on the man's forehead. Without waiting, Valyria raised her hand in a signal, and the group launched a swift assault. The cultists cried out in alarm, turning to face them. One tried to hurl a bolt of dark energy from a twisted staff, but Sir Balman's spear caught him in the chest before he could finish the incantation. Davos lunged at another, parrying a wild slash of an obsidian dagger and striking a lethal blow that scattered the cultist's mask to the ground. Gendry overpowered a third cultist with brute strength, smashing him against the statue. Within moments, the chanting ceased. 2 cultists lay dead and 1 was mortally wounded, while 2 more fled down a side corridor. The bound man collapsed to the floor. Valyria rushed to him, severing the ropes with a small blade. His eyes were wide, face pale with terror. He was middle-aged, wearing the ragged remnants of a merchant's attire. "Bless you," he croaked. "I'm from Volantis. They took me, said I was to feed their god." Valyria quickly checked his injuries. "You'll live, but you need to find a way out. Can you walk?" He nodded shakily, leaning on the statue for support. I think so." She glanced at Davos. "He can't go back alone. We need to guide him at least to the stairs." Balman Rivers stepped forward. "I'll take him, see him up to the courtyard, then I'll hurry back." Valyria hesitated, not liking splitting their forces, but recognized the necessity. "Be careful." Rivers supported the man, and together they disappeared up the corridor. The group pressed on, following the retreating cultists down the side passage. They found themselves in a warren of tunnels that branched off unpredictably. Pockets of foul-smelling water collected in corners, some of it faintly luminous with strange algae. Now and then they glimpsed carved bas-reliefs of dragons locked in battles with shadowy figures, perhaps a testament to ancient internal conflicts within the freehold. Finally, they reached a set of imposing double doors, half-rotted but still heavy, reinforced with iron banding that had rusted. A symbol scrawled across them in fresh blood depicted a stylized dragon skull with a flame in its maw. Valyria recognized it from the text describing Carnyx's faithful. "We're close," she murmured. "This must lead into one of the temple chambers connecting to the ossuary." Gendry tested the door, finding it barred from the other side. The group worked together to force it open, bracing shoulders against the wood, prying at the metal with swords, until at last it gave way with a groan. The moment it cracked open, an overwhelming stench of decay poured out, accompanied by a rustle that sent shivers up their spines. In the chamber beyond, torches flickered unnaturally, as if a breeze came from nowhere. The floor was strewn with bones, some of them clearly human, arranged in spirals. They stepped cautiously inside, hearts hammering. The chamber's ceiling soared above them, supported by carved pillars shaped like coiled serpents. On a raised platform at the far end stood a block of dark stone, a makeshift altar. Behind it loomed an archway draped with a black curtain. An oppressive silence hung in the air. A voice spoke from the darkness beyond the curtain, low and cruel. "You return to the source of nightmares, Valyria of the blood. Did you think we would not be ready?" Valyria's blood froze. She recognized the accent, that archaic lilt shared by the cultists, but this voice sounded deeper, thrumming with barely contained power. "Show yourself," she hissed, stepping forward. The black curtain parted, and out stepped a tall figure draped in robes of dark purple. His face was covered by a half-mask of silver, etched with swirling runes, revealing only a pair of eyes that glowed a faint red. He raised both hands, and as if in response, the bones on the floor shifted, sliding together to form grotesque shapes. Davos and Gendry flinched back as skeletal forms began assembling themselves, rising from the floor with unnatural speed, brandishing rusted weapons. "The dead obey," the masked figure intoned, voice dripping with triumph. "Your intrusion ends here." A chaotic melee ensued. The party hacked at the skeletons, which clattered and hissed. Every time a blow shattered bone, the fragments crawled across the floor, seeking to reassemble. Valyria realized they needed a more decisive approach. She locked eyes with Gendry, who nodded. Together, they drove toward the masked sorcerer, hoping that stopping him would break the spell. Davos and the Tarly Knights kept the skeletal horde at bay, though each moment it grew more dangerous. One skeleton lunged at Davos with a jagged blade. He dodged, but another raked him across the back with claw-like fingers. He cried out in pain, staggering. Rowan Tarly came to his aid, crushing the skeleton's skull with a heavy morning star. Sir Barth moved with lethal efficiency, slicing through bone after bone, but they reformed as quickly as they were cut. Valyria and Gendry advanced on the sorcerer who laughed behind his mask. He extended a staff topped with a black gem that pulsed. Valyria felt a wave of force slam into her, throwing her against a pillar. Her head spun, sparks dancing in her vision. Gendry charged, sword raised high, but the sorcerer sidestepped, lashing out with what appeared to be a whip of shadow that cracked across Gendry's armor, leaving a sizzling mark. Gendry grunted, stumbling but staying upright. Valyria shook off her daze, forcing herself back into the fray. She thrust her Valyrian steel blade at the sorcerer's flank, hoping to disrupt another spell. He hissed in pain as the blade nicked his side, blood staining his robes. She saw rage flare in those eerie crimson eyes. Another wave of force erupted, knocking her back, but not before Gendry took advantage of the opening. He slashed down at the sorcerer's staff, aiming to break it. The staff shattered with a bright flash, shards of the black gem flying across the chamber. At once, the skeletal constructs faltered, collapsing into piles of inert bones. The Tarly Knights and Davos, panting, looked on as the sorcerer staggered, a raw, angry wound on his side. Yet despite the damage, he let out a keening laugh. "Fools, breaking my staff only severs a fraction of our power." Valyria advanced, sword at the ready. "Where's the ossuary of whispers? Where's the heart of your cult?" He sneered, lips curling behind the half-mask. "It does not matter. The Astrix Morga shall proceed." Gendry put his sword to the sorcerer's throat. Tell us or you'll die here. Something in the sorcerer's eyes gleamed. Kill me, and you kill your only guide through the labyrinth, he spat. Karnax's legacy will bloom regardless. My death changes nothing. Davos, limping from his wound, approached. He might be right. We're lost down here. We need to find that ossuary. Valyria pressed her blade closer. You'll lead us, now, or I promise Drogon will devour your remains, soul and all. The sorcerer let out a bark of laughter. You cling to threats, but your dragon is not here. Then he paused, perhaps sensing the unwavering determination in Varys' expression. Very well. I will lead you into darkness. But you will regret it. Wynina. We have no time for your curses, Valyria growled. She stripped him of any hidden weapons, pulling off the half-mask to reveal a gaunt face carved with runes, eyes indeed glowing with some foul magic. She destroyed the mask under her heel. Gendry forced the sorcerer's wrists into shackles. Try anything, you lose your hands, Gendry warned. All around them the chamber was littered with bone fragments, but the threat was momentarily subdued. Davos clutched his side, wiping blood from his brow. Let's move. The longer we stay, the more likely reinforcements come. Wow. With the sorcerer in tow, they pressed deeper. The corridors took on a distinctly older feel, the stone walls etched with script that predated even High Valyrian. Fissures in the ceiling dripped with a slow trickle of water, forming stagnant puddles on the floor. Now and then, a tremor shook the earth, a reminder that Valyria's bones were never at rest. The sorcerer led them through twisting passages, occasionally muttering words under his breath, as though he communicated with unseen entities. Valyria stayed close, blade at his back, ensuring he didn't deviate from the path. Finally, they came to an immense iron gate so corroded it looked greenish in the torchlight. Beyond it, the corridor opened into a wide hall lined with stone sarcophagi. Valyria's stomach tightened. From her studies, she guessed this was part of the necropolis where the greatest Valyrian sorcerers had once been entombed. Their captive smiled with sick delight. Welcome to the outer threshold of the ossuary of whispers. Would you like to proceed? Oh. Before Valyria could respond, a low chanting drifted from beyond the gate. The words were guttural, layered with an inhuman resonance. A red glow pulsed, emanating from somewhere deeper within. Gendry looked to Valyria, brow furrowed. This must be it. Valyria nodded, pushing the sorcerer forward. Open it. He raised his hands, making a complicated gesture. For a moment, Valyria thought he might be casting a spell on them, but the iron gate groaned, the ancient metal sliding aside. The chanting grew louder, along with the red glow that flickered like heartbeat. The group stepped through, weapons ready, hearts pounding. They emerged into a vast subterranean chamber that dwarfed anything they'd seen above. It was rectangular, lined with towering columns carved into the shapes of shrieking dragons. The floor was polished black stone, inlaid with swirling patterns of gold that converged at a central dais. On that dais sat an enormous black orb, swirling with crimson light from within, as though it contained molten rock. Around it, dozens of cultists in robes knelt in concentric circles, chanting "Dati." Some wore masks of gold, others of iron, and a handful had bare faces etched with runes. A reek of sulfur and something far fouler burned the air. At the far side of the chamber, perched on an ornate throne of fused bone and metal, sat a figure in elaborate robes. His face was mostly hidden by a golden mask wrought in the shape of a dragon's head, rubies glinting for eyes. A hush fell as the newly arrived party stepped onto the polished floor. All the cultists turned to stare, but none broke the circle. The figure on the throne slowly rose. "Ah," he said, voice echoing in the chamber. "The interlopers have arrived, and they brought me a gift." His gaze fixed on the captive sorcerer, then on Valyria. "And you, the rider of Drogon, who tried to snuff us out one shrine at a time." Valyria swallowed hard, seeing the swirling energies coalescing in the black orb. "This ends now," she said, voice trembling with contained fury. "No more abominations, no more twisted magic." The masked leader let out a low chuckle. "Such conviction. But you are too late. The Asterix Morga is nearly complete. Soon, this orb shall tear the veil between living flame and demon essence. Karnax's knowledge guides us. The result shall be a new breed of dragon, and a new dominion." Nanda. Gendry raised his sword. You're mad if you think we'll let that happen. Stop them, the leader commanded. Immediately the cultists surged to their feet. Some brandished weapons, others raised staffs that crackled with black or red arcs of magic. Davos muttered, "We can't fight so many at once." Valyria nodded, thinking quickly. "We destroy the orb. That's key. Just like we destroyed the brazier in the temple." But the black orb loomed large, easily the size of a carriage. It pulsed with energy, and the dais on which it sat was wreathed in runic symbols that glowed blood red. The cultists formed a living shield around it, chanting faster, feeding the swirling power within. Already, the temperature in the chamber rose, steam curling from the floor. Chaos erupted as the party attempted to break through. A hail of arcane bolts whizzed past, sizzling on the stone. The Tarly couple bravely led a charge, knocking cultists aside with heavy blows. Gendry hammered through any that got in his way, unstoppable as a bull. Valyria darted, blade flashing as she cut down a staff-wielding fanatic who tried to conjure illusions. Davos followed, flanking her, though a pained grimace marred his face from his earlier wound. Above, near the throne, the masked leader chanted an incantation. The columns shaped like shrieking dragons came alive, their stone forms cracking to reveal living shapes of molten rock within. These stone dragon effigies crashed to the floor, hissing steam, each about the size of a warhorse, eyes glowing the color of coals. They bared fiery maws and lunged at the intruders. Davos cursed as one of the creatures spat a stream of molten lava in his direction. He rolled to the side, barely avoiding a fiery death. Gendry hacked at one, the steel of his sword meeting the creature's rocky hide with a dull clang. The blow chipped away chunks, but did not fell it. Valyria realized they needed a more potent force. She prayed for Drogon to sense her desperation. High above, outside in the ruined city, Drogon roared, circling the spires in frustration. Asha's group had launched a skirmish, drawing out a large contingent of cultists, but the ground under them trembled with ominous force. Asha fired crossbow bolts at robed figures who tried to hurl spells from behind broken walls. The swirl of illusions made the city appear and disappear in the gloom. Meanwhile, Drogon's roar suggested a restless fury. He could feel Valyria's presence deep beneath the earth. At last, something snapped in Drogon's mind. He soared overhead, scanning for an entry point. Scenting the faint traces of Valyria's path, he landed with an earth-shaking thud near the courtyard that led to the catacombs. A few cultists rushed him with spears, but he batted them aside with savage swipes of his claws, flame spilling from his jaws. He tore open the collapsed entrance with his talons, dislodging massive stones, driven by an almost frantic need to reach Valyria. Asha watched in awe and a hint of alarm. "He's going after her," she muttered. "Gods help anyone in his way." In the ossuary, the swirling energies around the orb grew more violent. The masked leader raised both arms, chanting a final invocation. "Rise, O flame of Carnanax! Rise! Consume the mortal plane!" The stone beneath the orb cracked, and a fountain of molten lava burst forth, swirling around the orb like a serpent made of living fire. Valyria's group was driven back by the onslaught. Gendry struggled with the stone dragon effigy, which clamped a fiery maw on his shield, melting the metal. He roared in pain, discarding the ruined shield and shoved his sword forward, piercing the creature's throat. With a rumble, it collapsed into chunks of molten rock. The Tarly Knights faced another effigy, their combined might smashing it piece by piece, though Rowan Tarly took a searing wound in the process. Davos managed to slip past some of the chaos to approach the dais, only to be intercepted by a wave of cultists brandishing obsidian knives. Valyria, breathing heavily, fought her way through the ring of fanatics. She glimpsed the swirling lava around the orb, the cracks spreading across the dais. If the orb completed its transformation, something monstrous would be unleashed. She had to stop it. She recalled how the abomination they fought earlier was vulnerable to a well-placed spear charged with Valyrian runes. But this orb was much larger, possibly containing a living conjuration. A normal blade might not suffice. She blocked an obsidian spear thrust from a masked woman, then whirled, cutting the fanatic down. Her eyes darted around the chamber until she saw the shimmering shards of the sorcerer's broken staff. One chunk of the black gem still glowed faintly with arcane power. Perhaps that piece could disrupt the orb if used properly. But to handle it was to risk corruption. Gathering her courage, Valyria dashed to the shattered staff, ignoring the cultists who screamed invocations in her direction. Davos and Gendry tried to cover her, each engaged in separate battles. She seized the largest fragment of the gem, feeling a jolt of foul energy course through her veins. Her vision swam, and for a moment, she heard a voice that promised infinite power if she only submitted. Gritting her teeth, Valyria fought off the seduction, focusing instead on what must be done. She shoved the shard against her sword's crossguard, letting it fuse with the Valyrian steel, an impromptu binding. Sparks flew, and her blade glowed with an eerie mix of black and silver light. She turned to the orb, steeling herself. The masked leader on the throne took note, pointing and shrieking, "Stop her!" The swirling lava coiled into a massive serpentine shape, lashing out at Valyria. She dove aside, feeling the heat sear her shoulder. Her sword's new power flared, capturing the serpent's attention as though it recognized a threat. With no time to second-guess, Valyria sprinted up the dais, ignoring the pain in her body, ignoring the cultists who slashed at her from behind. She raised the sword high and brought it down on the orb with all her might. The blade struck, releasing a blinding flare of energy. The chamber echoed with a thunderous boom that knocked everyone off their feet, including the masked leader. The black orb cracked, light spewing from within in jagged arcs. At that precise moment, the far wall exploded inward with a roar of fury. Drogon smashed through the stone, a torrent of dust and rubble cascading around him. His eyes glowed with savage anger, fixating on Valyria and the orb that threatened to annihilate her. The moment he burst into the chamber, he unleashed a powerful blast of flame that swept across the dais, enveloping cultists in a conflagration. The masked leader screamed in rage and fear. No, the circle must not be broken. He tried to channel a desperate spell, but Drogon's fire overwhelmed the dais. The swirling lava serpent hissed and recoiled. The orb, already fractured by Valyria's blow, shuddered violently under the intense heat. Veins of brilliant red light spread across its surface. The incantation fueling a Strix Morga faltered, the circle broken in multiple places by the intruder's assault. An unearthly keening noise rose, high and piercing, as if the orb itself was howling. The masked leader staggered away, robes catching fire. He ripped the golden mask from his face, revealing a man gaunt and twisted, half his skin burned with runic scars. "No," he sobbed, trying to piece together a final incantation. Valyria leapt forward, driving her sword through his chest, the black shard crackling with malefic energy. His eyes bulged, and he collapsed, smoke rising from the wound. All around, cultists fled or were consumed by Drogon's fire. The dais crumbled, the orb's glow reaching a searing brightness. Valyria sensed a final cataclysmic release coming. She shouted to her companions, "Get back! It's going to—" Before she could finish, the orb imploded in a riot of swirling crimson light. Shockwaves of molten fragments shot out in every direction. Valyria braced herself, arms up. Gendry lunged to shield her with his battered armor. A chunk of the orb slammed into his pauldron, sending him reeling. Davos and the Tarly Knights dove behind a broken column. Drogon roared, interposing his bulk, wings half extended to protect Valyria and Gendry from further debris. The explosion died as suddenly as it began, leaving the chamber in darkness, but for scattered fires. The dais was obliterated. The swirling lava serpent had vanished. The runic symbols on the floor no longer glowed. The masked leader lay dead, and the cultists who still lived scrambled to flee into side tunnels, dropping their weapons in abject terror. The once majestic hall was now a blasted ruin, pillars broken, the walls blackened by soot. For several heartbeats, no one moved or spoke. Valyria blinked the dust from her eyes, searching for her companions in the gloom. "Gendry!" she called, voice shaking. He coughed, emerging from behind Drogon's flank. "I'm all right," he rasped, though he clutched his arm, blood trickling from a jagged cut. "What about you?" She nodded, tears of relief stinging her eyes. Davos, Rowan, and Lana, Tarly, and Sir Barth Snow emerged, grimy and exhausted but alive. It appeared the forced entry by Drogon had saved them from being trapped or overwhelmed. The great dragon towered over them, wings drooping in exhaustion, smoke rising from his jaws. Valyria placed a trembling hand on Drogon's scaled neck, feeling the thunder of his heartbeat. They stood among the wreckage, barely comprehending what they'd done. The orb was destroyed, the circle shattered, and the cult's final aspiration to resurrect Karnax's ultimate horror thwarted. For a moment, relief threatened to overwhelm them. Yet Valyria couldn't help but recall how these cultists scattered like roaches, always returning in some form or another. Their greatest weapon, Astrix Morga, was undone, but smaller pockets of darkness might remain, scurrying to the deeper tunnels or fleeing across the sea. Still, they had won a decisive victory. Whatever monstrous being the cult had tried to unleash was snuffed out at the threshold of its birth. Valyria took a deep breath, turning to Davos, who leaned on his sword for support. "It's over," she said softly. "Or as over as it can be. The city might still hide remnants, but without their seat of power, they won't be able to unify again for a long time." Davos nodded. "Thank the gods, or whichever powers might still be listening in this forsaken place." He mustered a weary grin. "Time we got out of here, eh?" The Tarly knights agreed, each sporting bruises and burns. Sir Barth Snow simply inclined his head, ever the man of few words, but relief shone in his eyes. Gendry caught Varys' gaze. "We did it," he murmured. "But we wouldn't have without you?" She shook her head. "Nor without all of you. We stand or fall together." She smiled faintly, letting the tension ease from her shoulders. They began picking their way back through the corridors, Drogon smashing or melting any debris that blocked their path. Cultists who had survived scattered like frightened ghosts at the sight of the black dragon's glowing eyes. Slowly, laboriously, they ascended to the surface, guided by the flicker of torchlight and Varys' memory of the route. Along the way, they reunited with Sir Balman Rivers, who had come back down after escorting a wounded merchant but was delayed by pockets of cultist resistance. Together, the battered band emerged onto the city's broken streets, greeted by the pale light of a new dawn seeping through ash-filled skies. Asha's group, also bloodied and bruised, waited near the courtyard with a few wounded fighters. They had battled a significant force of cultists, losing 3 men in the process, but they succeeded in drawing attention away from the infiltration. Asha scowled at the collapsed tunnel Drogon had made, but seeing everyone alive, she let out a breath of genuine relief. "You all look like hell," she said, her typical bluntness shining through. "Did you succeed, or was that entire city-shaking explosion just the foundations collapsing on your heads?" Davos gave her a tired grin. "We succeeded. The orb they were making is gone, their leader is dead, and the ritual is broken." Gendry nodded. No unstoppable abomination this day. For a moment, an odd hush fell over the group, each of them processing the scale of what they had faced and accomplished. Then the tension gave way to exhausted joy. The small band exchanged weary smiles, even laughter. Asha patted Varys' shoulder in congratulations. Sir Barth, having seen the scale of the threat, bowed slightly to Valyria, acknowledging her leadership. Drogon, battered and scorched, let out a deep rumble that reverberated through the smoldering ruin. Despite everything, the city still loomed around them, ancient and malevolent. But its darkest designs for now had been shattered. They made their way back to the cove slowly, carrying their wounded. The path felt interminably long, each alley and collapsed structure a reminder of the horror that had long festered here. Occasional cult stragglers lurked, but none dared approach the victorious band, not with Drogon's silhouette overhead. By the time they reached the black sand shore, the sun was high, filtered through the perpetual haze of smoke and volcanic dust. The Kraken's eye waited, battered but afloat. The sight of it gladdened their hearts. At the water's edge, Valyria turned to face the city one last time. She took in the broken spires, the magma-lit fissures, the columns of steam rising from the smoking sea. This land had nearly claimed her life and soul. She had spent so long fighting its darkness, she'd nearly forgotten what it felt like to hope. But now, with the cult's main seat of power destroyed, maybe Valyria could finally rest in something approaching true ruin, no longer a staging ground for nightmares. "Will you stay here still?" Davos asked quietly, coming to stand beside her. "Guarding the ruins, as you did before?" She shook her head, voice tinged with a quiet resolve. I've done all I can for Valyria. Let the city's ghosts remain. The living must move on. Perhaps I'll return now and then to ensure no new threat rises, but I won't linger here alone." She glanced at Drogon, who watched her intently, nostrils flaring. "We deserve a moment's peace." Davos nodded, relief plain on his face. "Come with us. The realm owes you a debt. You'll be welcomed in King's Landing or anywhere else you choose to go." "Mwah." She hesitated, recalling how Daenerys Targaryen's last visit to King's Landing had ended. The city's memory might be long and filled with sorrow. But Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, Asha, they had all shown they were capable of bridging old wounds. And King Bran, whose calm rule had already marked a new era, might make good on the vow to welcome her. "I will," she said softly, making her decision. "If only for a time. Drogon and I can't stay caged in any keep. But we'll stand with Westeros if it needs us." Neil Gendry grinned, hearing that. "I'm sure Tyrion will be glad to see you." Asha smirked, "And I'm sure the small folk will have quite a shock when Drogon circles overhead again." Somewhere high above, a flock of ash-streaked crows took flight, startled by the movement of the party as they boarded the longboat. Valyria guided Drogon to fly alongside the ship, for he was far too large to fit upon its deck. Perhaps if they found a way to tow a raft for him, but that seemed impractical. Instead, he would follow overhead, gliding gracefully over the seas. And so they departed Valyria, leaving behind the city of nightmares to its crumbling skeletons and boiling vents. The return trip was not without hardship. Storms pummeled the ship, and a few times Drogon had to brave tempestuous skies to keep pace. But they pressed on, hearts buoyed by the knowledge that the greatest danger was behind them. Wounds were tended, lost friends mourned, and stories exchanged. In hushed corners of the ship, the companions spoke of the horrors they had witnessed in the ossuary, the swirling orb that nearly birthed a second doom. They comforted each other with quiet words and simple acts of kindness. At last, the coastline of Westeros came into view, and the sun broke through the clouds as though welcoming them home. As the Kraken's Eye sailed into Blackwater Bay, onlookers crowded the docks, pointing at the skies in awe and alarm at the sight of Drogon's black wings silhouetted against the sky. Cries of "Dragon" once again spread through the city, though this time it was not a surprise attack, but a triumphant return. The Watchers might recall that last time, Drogon's arrival heralded destruction, but word quickly spread that Vera was coming in peace, accompanied by Davos, Asha, and Gendry. King Bran, informed by Raven of the expedition's success, arranged a subdued but heartfelt welcome in the Red Keep's courtyard. Tyrion stood beside him, along with Brienne of Tarth, Sansa Stark, who had remained in the capital to wait for news of her knight's fate. They watched as the Kraken's Eye anchored and the battered warriors disembarked. Then all eyes turned skyward, where Drogon circled once more. Valyria guided him to land in the open field outside the city walls, mindful of the citizens' lingering fear. She dismounted, offering a gentle stroke to the dragon's snout, assuring him that all was well. Then she walked through the city gates with Davos, Gendry, and the others, the people parting in wonder. Some even cheered softly, though many still looked frightened. The memory of Dragonfire was not so easily banished, yet word of how this black dragon and his rider had fought twisted horrors in far-off lands kindled a new respect. In the courtyard, Bran greeted them in his calm, measured way. "You have returned," he said, gazing at Valyria with those deep eyes that missed nothing. "We saw visions of your trials. We felt the quake when the orb was destroyed. The city is in your debt." Tyrion stepped forward, his expression a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Welcome back. I see you've saved us from another wave of nightmares." He paused, noticing the scars and weariness etched in Varys' face. "I hope we can finally offer you some rest." Valyria inclined her head, her voice quiet. "Thank you. I'm not used to being welcomed. But yes, we could use rest. Drogon, too." She glanced back at the city gates. "I know your people might fear him, but he will not harm them if they let him be." Bran nodded. "We will give him space and see that he's fed. There are livestock outside the city if that is acceptable. We can arrange to bring them to a safer feeding ground. In time, perhaps the fear will lessen." "Ah, nay." Davos exhaled, stepping aside for a physician who approached to tend his bandaged wound. Gendry clapped Valyria on the shoulder as if to say, "You've done it." Asha let out a tired laugh, glancing around at the polished courtyard. "Feels strange to be here again, and not in chains, not under siege," she murmured. "A good strange." Sansa approached, embracing Sir Barth Snow, who knelt at her feet to show his respect. She beckoned Valyria closer. "I've heard a great deal about you, Valyria of Valyria," she said in a warm, dignified tone. "Tales both fearsome and heroic. Welcome to King's Landing. My brother says we owe you thanks for preventing a horror beyond measure." Valyria studied Sansa's face, thinking of all the tragedies and triumphs the Stark family had endured. "Thank you, my lady," she said, not knowing what else to say. A hush fell for a moment as everyone absorbed the significance of this moment. A child of Valyria bonded to the last known dragon, standing side by side with the rulers of Westeros, not as an invader or conqueror, but as an ally who had fought to protect the realm from a threat it barely understood. The wheel Daenerys once tried to break seemed, in its own slow, painful way, to be shifting. Over the following days, Valyria and Drogon were offered a temporary residence on the outskirts of the city, near fields large enough for a dragon to roam without alarming the entire population. Soldiers kept watch from a respectful distance, ensuring that no curious souls wandered too close. Tyrion arranged daily deliveries of sheep and goats, which Drogon devoured in mighty gulps, occasionally letting out a satisfied roar that echoed across the horizon. To the city's relief, he showed no aggression toward passing farmers or travelers who kept their distance. Meanwhile, the realm's lords and ladies, hearing of the expedition's success, sent ravens of congratulations, though some messages were laced with veiled questions. Would Valyria seek a claim to the Iron Throne as a Targaryen's successor? Was she to be crowned a queen? Bran firmly answered that Valyria sought no crown, and she had come not for rule but for refuge. In time, those rumors died down. As Valyria regained her strength, she spent hours speaking with Tyrion, Davos, Gendry, Sansa, and Bran about the future. Though the cult's leadership had been decimated and a Strix Morga thwarted, no one could guarantee that some new threat would not arise from the ruins of Valyria or elsewhere. Their world was vast and magic, once awakened, seldom returned to eternal slumber. Valyria acknowledged she would continue to serve as a sentinel, traveling not just to Valyria but across the narrow sea if rumors of dark sorceries emerged. She vowed that, should danger come again, she would fight for the living. In the evenings, she visited the Red Keep's library, accompanied by Tyrion. Together they pored over ancient scrolls, cross-referencing the new knowledge Valyria had gleaned in Valyria with what remained of Targaryen records. They talked at length about how best to handle the question of dragons in the realm. "If Drogon is truly the last," Tyrion mused, "then your bond with him is precious indeed. The realm might learn to accept him, or even come to admire him, so long as they see him used for defense, not conquest." Varys' gaze lingered on the old pages, some bearing images of Targaryen kings atop their dragons. "I wish that for us," she said softly. "I don't want to follow the same path. Fire and blood. It brought so much pain. Perhaps Drogon and I can be a sign that dragons need not always herald destruction." One day, as she wandered the city's outskirts, she came upon a group of small folk children who had ventured to catch a glimpse of Drogon from a distance. They scampered back, startled when they saw her, but she smiled gently, kneeling so as not to tower over them. "He won't hurt you," she promised. "He's had enough fighting to last a lifetime." The children, wary but curious, asked questions about the dragon's color, his size, his roar. Valyria answered patiently, letting them see that she was not a monster, nor was Drogon. It was a small moment, but a meaningful one, sowing the first seeds of new perception. In time, word reached the capital that pirates and mercenaries who once operated in the Stepstones had begun to fear traveling near the smoking sea. A few boasted of having glimpsed the black dragon scorching entire covens of cultists on charred beaches. Even if some accounts were exaggerations, they painted a picture of a vigilant guardian rather than a rampaging beast. It seemed the legend of Valyria and Drogon had outpaced the old nightmares in some corners of the world. Nonetheless, the burdens of forging a new life in Westeros or anywhere else remain. Valyria was still haunted by the memories of twisted experiments, chanting cultists, and the overwhelming gloom of Valyria. Some nights, she woke from dreams, heart pounding, sensing an echo of that black orb's malevolence. Other times, she found herself gazing eastward from the walls, half expecting to see plumes of smoke rising anew. Yet each day spent in the company of allies, each conversation over a shared meal in the Red Keep, chipped away at her isolation. She had found people worth protecting, who likewise had stood beside her in that forsaken land. Eventually, Bran summoned her for a private audience. He wished to speak about the future in more formal terms. When Valyria entered the king's solar, she found him seated by a window, crows perched on the sill outside. Tyrion stood by, as did Davos, Sansa, and Sir Brienne. Bran motioned for Valyria to sit. "Your presence in the realm is a crossroads," Bran began. "We do not wish to bind you. You have more than earned your freedom to roam. However, we would be remiss not to acknowledge that you and Drogon are a force unlike any in the world. If you would accept it, we name Protector of the Eastern Seas, with the authority to patrol and safeguard the waters between Westeros. No one here can match your reach or your power in those skies." Valyria was taken aback. "Protector. That sounds like a title once given to Targaryen princes." Bran inclined his head slightly. "Times change, but the principle stands. We offer you a role that suits your might and your proven responsibility. You wouldn't be obligated to remain in King's Landing. Far from it, but should threats arise, you would act with the crown's blessing to face them. In turn, you would have the realm's support. Ships, supplies, safe harbor in any port. Ships, supplies, safe harbor in any port." Tyrion spoke up, smiling gently. "We thought it fair to extend an official position rather than letting rumors swirl about you as an unsanctioned power. This way, no one can accuse you of being a rogue dragon rider preying on shipping lanes." "Nay." Valyria considered the offer, torn between gratitude and the fear of becoming entangled in politics. But then she remembered the wide seas she had flown over with Drogon, the countless times she had hesitated to approach certain ports for fear of hostility. This title, this recognition, might grant her the freedom to do what she wished, to protect, to explore, without constant suspicion. "I accept," she said softly, "but I make no promises about always being within call. Drogon and I must roam." "Naho." Bran's gaze was understanding. "That is acceptable. We trust your judgment." And so it was that Valyria came to be known not as a would-be conqueror, but as a protector blessed by the crown. Over the months that followed, she took to the skies alongside Drogon, patrolling the waters beyond the Stepstones, intercepting slavers or pirates emboldened by the chaos in the east. She flew north on occasion, glimpsing the wall in the distance, marveling at the stark cold that contrasted Valyria's heat. She even ventured to the Vale of Arryn, landing in high meadows to let Drogon rest while she gazed at the jagged peaks. Everywhere she went, people spoke in hushed awe, uncertain whether to greet her or hide. Yet as time passed, stories spread of how she saved merchant ships from marauders, or drove back strange beasts rumored to lurk in lists. In King's Landing, Tyrion curated a new compendium, the Valyrian War of Shadows. With Davos' help, he recorded every detail of the battles against the cult, including the second expedition. He made special note of Valyria's role, hoping that future generations might learn from the mistakes of the old empire, rather than repeat them. He dedicated the tome to all those who stand against the darkness, in memory of those who first lit the flame. A year after the destruction of the orb, the crown held a small ceremony to honor the memory of those who had fallen in Valyria. A statue in the Red Keep's courtyard was erected, depicting a faceless knight with a broken sword, representing every unknown soul lost in the fight against the cult. Valyria attended, standing quietly beside Gendry and Davos, listening to King Bran's solemn words about unity and vigilance. She gazed at the statue and felt the weight of her own ghosts lift, if only slightly. Life in Westeros moved on as it always did. Harvests were planted and reaped, lords squabbled over borders, alliances formed through marriage, and the small folk prayed for mild winters. But now, woven into the tapestry of daily life, was the knowledge that somewhere in the sky, a black dragon flew, guided by a rider who bore the legacy of a shattered empire, yet served the living realm. Children grew up hearing tales not just of Aegon the Conqueror or the Mad King, but also of Valyria, the Protector, who soared on the wings of the last dragon, unbound by a thirst for power, bound instead by choice and duty. It was not an end, to all struggles. Darkness never vanished entirely. Whispers persisted that some cultists survived, skulking in distant corners of Essos. Across the summer sea, other civilizations watched with interest, wondering if Valyria might someday be reclaimed in truth. But for the moment, the hammer blow of Asterix Morga had been averted. The horrors of undead dragons and demon fire remained sealed in a broken orb and a ruined city. Valyria had chosen to stand with Westeros, and Westeros, in turn, had found a way to embrace her without another war. On a crisp morning, just before setting out on another journey eastward, Valyria found herself atop a hill overlooking the Blackwater Rush. Drogon rested behind her, the warmth of his massive body warding off the chill breeze. She closed her eyes, letting the wind carry the scent of pine and fresh grass. It was so different from the sulphurous stench of Valyria. Once that haunted land was all she had known, and all she had thought to protect. Now, she realized that her heart had expanded. She cared about the people she had met, the friends she had made. She cared about the farmland, the villages, the quiet corners of the 7 kingdoms that teemed with simple, precious life. Leaning back against Drogon's flank, she ran a hand over his scarred scales. "We're not alone anymore," she whispered. She sensed Drogon's rumbling response deep in his chest, felt the quiet contentment in his posture. For years they had wandered together, forging a bond in the ashes of an ancient empire. Now, for all their power, the greatest gift they had found was belonging, a place in the world that did not revolve solely around conquest or survival, but around shared purpose. Sooner or later, they would fly again to the ruins, perhaps to ensure no new abominations rose from the cracks. Sooner or later, new storms would gather, and new threats would test the realm's resolve. But in this moment of dawn light, with the river shining below them and crows cawing in the distant fields, Valyria felt a sense of cautious hope. She thought of the countless years in which dragons had been symbols of fear, destruction, and destiny. Maybe it was possible at last for a dragon to symbolize something more. And so the tale continued, unwinding into the uncertain future. There would be more battles, more songs, more journeys across seas and skies. Yet for all the perils lurking in the shadows, for all the echoes of the doom that still whispered through Valyria's broken towers, one thing had changed irreversibly. Drogon, once Daenerys Targaryen's living flame of war, had returned with a new rider not to conquer, but to save. And in that choice lay the seed of a new legend, one that spoke to the resilience of life, the possibility of redemption, and the fragile hope that even in a world often ruled by fire and blood, there could be a place for renewal, for compassion, for a story that did not end in ashes. And so they flew onward, rider and dragon, forging an uncharted path beneath the great vault of the sky, guided by the steady pulse of hearts that refused to surrender to the darkness, carrying forward a promise that the old cycle might yet be broken, and a new dream of unity could take shape from the embers of an empire long fallen to ruin.